In the quiet hum of a village tea-house, a single whisper catches Miss Marple's ear. A cryptic plan for a final arrangement. A dropped receipt for a deadly poison glints in the sunlight, and a name Clara hangs in the air like a warning. Who are these strangers plotting murder? Why is Clara marked for death? And can one sharp-eyed spinster unravel a killer's scheme before it's too late? In St. Mary Mead, secrets bloom like poison, and Miss Marple's tiny glimpse might be all that stands between life and a cold, calculated grave. Chapter 1. The Whisper. In the Teahusith village of St. Mary Mead, with its cobblestone lanes and ivy-clad cottages, wore the soft glow of an autumn afternoon like a well-loved shawl. The air carried the crisp bite of October, laced with the faint sweetness of apples from the orchard beyond the churchyard. Miss Jane Marple, her silver hair neatly pinned beneath a modest felt hat, stepped lightly along the high street, her basket swinging gently on her arm. She had no particular errand today, save for the quiet pleasure of a visit to Mrs. Pippin's tea-house, a haven of clinking china and murmured gossip. It was, she thought, the perfect place to observe the subtle currents that ran beneath the village's placid surface. Mrs. Pippin's tea-house, nestled between the butcher's shop and the post office, was a quaint establishment with lace curtains and tables adorned with mismatched teacups. The bell above the door jingled as Miss Marple entered, greeted by the warm aroma of freshly baked scones and the low hum of conversation. She nodded politely to Mrs. Pippin, a stout woman with flour-dusted hands and a perpetual smile, and chose a table near the window, where sunlight dappled the checkered tablecloth. From here, she could see the comings and goings of the village, but more importantly, she could hear Miss Marple settled into her chair, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on a pale blue scarf for her nephew's wife. Her eyes, sharp and bright despite her years, flitted over the room, taking in the familiar faces. Mr. Craddock, the vicar, discussing hymns with Mrs. Lumley, young Sally Trotter, giggling with her friends over a plate of jam tarts, and old Mr. Finch, the manor's gardener, nursing a cup of tea with a weary sigh. But it was the two strangers at the corner table who caught her attention, their heads bent close, their voices low and urgent. The pair, a man and a woman, were not of St. Mary Mead. That much was clear. The man, perhaps in his late 30s, had a lean, angular face, his dark hair slicked back with precision. His suit, though well-tailored, was slightly worn at the cuffs, suggesting a man who cared for appearances, but lacked the means to maintain them fully. The woman, younger, with auburn hair pinned loosely beneath a cloaky hat, had a nervous energy about her, her fingers twisting a napkin into knots. Their conversation, though hushed, carried a weight that piqued Miss Marple's curiosity. She leaned forward slightly, her knitting a perfect pretense, and strained to catch their words. The man's voice was sharp, like the snap of a twig in a quiet wood. "It's the final arrangement. Elise, Clara mustn't suspect a thing." The woman, Elise, replied in a whisper that trembled with unease. "But what if she does? She's not as frail as you think, Victor. She's sharp, always watching." Victor's laugh was low, almost a hiss. "She's an old woman, alone in that crumbling house. She'll be no trouble. The plan is set by next week. It'll be done." Miss Marple's needles paused for the briefest moment, her heart quickening. The word plan hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy with intent. She resumed her knitting, her face serene, but her mind was already turning, sifting through the fragments of what she'd heard. Clara, the name was familiar, though not immediately placeable. St. Mary Mead was small, but its secrets were many, and Miss Marple had a knack for uncovering them. As she sipped her tea, a delicate Earl Grey, she watched the strangers from the corner of her eye. Victor leaned back, his posture relaxed, but his eyes darting toward the door, as if expecting an interruption. Elise, meanwhile, seemed to shrink into herself, her gaze fixed on the table. Miss Marple noted the small details: Victor's polished shoes, scuffed at the toes; Elise's gloves, expensive but frayed at the seams; and most curiously, a small piece of paper that slipped from Victor's pocket as he adjusted his chair. It fluttered to the floor, unnoticed by the pair, and lay there like a silent invitation. Miss Marple waited. Patience, she knew, was her greatest ally. When Mrs. Pippin bustled over to offer more tea, Miss Marple declined with a smile, then rose. As if to adjust her shawl, she moved with the unhurried grace of an elderly lady, her steps taking her past the stranger's table. With a deft movement, disguised as a stumble, she bent to retrieve the paper, tucking it into her sleeve before returning to her seat. The paper, when she examined it later under the guise of adjusting her spectacles, was a receipt from a chemist. In the nearby town of Much Benham, it listed a purchase of aconite, a rare and deadly poison derived from the monkshood plant. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. Aconite was not a common purchase, not for gardening or medicine, not in the quantities listed. Her mind flickered to the name Clara, and a memory surfaced. Clara Haverford, the reclusive widow who lived in the old manor at the edge of the village. Could she be the target of this final arrangement? The tea-house grew quieter as the afternoon waned. Victor and Elise rose to leave, their conversation cut short. Miss Marple watched them go, noting the way Victor's hand lingered on Elise's arm, a gesture that seemed more controlling than affectionate. The bell jingled, and they were gone, leaving behind a faint unease that settled over the room like. Thus Miss Marple finished her tea, her thoughts racing. Clara Haverford was not a close acquaintance, but Miss Marple knew her as a proud, solitary woman, widowed for over a decade and rarely seen in the village. Her manor, with its overgrown gardens and peeling paint, was a relic of grander days, and rumors swirled about her wealth or lack thereof. Could Victor and Elise be after an inheritance, a debt, or something darker? She paid her bill, exchanging pleasantries with Mrs. Pippin, who remarked on the stranger's odd behavior. Not from around here, those two, Mrs. Pippin said, wiping her hands on her apron. Kept to themselves, didn't even touch their scones. Funny that. Very funny, Miss Marple agreed, her tone mild but her mind sharp. She stepped out into the cooling air, the receipt still tucked safely in her sleeve. The village was settling into its evening rhythm, the butcher closing his shop, children racing home from the green, and the distant chime of the church bell marking the hour. But for Miss Marple, the day was far from over. She walked slowly toward her cottage, her mind weaving a tapestry of possibilities. The mention of Clara, the aconite, the stranger's secrecy, it all pointed to something sinister. Yet she had no proof, only a glimpse, a whisper, and a receipt. It was enough, though. Miss Marple had solved mysteries. With less at home, she settled into her armchair by the fire, her knitting abandoned for the moment. She unfolded the receipt, studying it under the soft glow of her lamp. The chemist's name was clear, H. Grayson and Sons, Much Benham. She knew Mr. Grayson, a meticulous man who kept detailed records. A visit might yield more information, perhaps the identity of the buyer, or at least a description. But first, Clara. Miss Marple recalled the widow's habits, pieced together from village gossip and her own observations. Clara rarely left her manor, relying on a young maid, Lucy, for errands. She had a nephew, Victor, who visited occasionally. Could he be the same Victor from the tea-house? The coincidence was too striking to ignore. And Elise, the nervous woman, who was she, a friend, a conspirator, or something else? Miss Marple rose, her movements deliberate, and fetched her notebook from the desk. She jotted down the names Victor, Elise, Clara, and the word aconite in her neat, precise handwriting. Below, she wrote, final arrangement, by next week. The phrase chilled her, not for its ambiguity, but for its certainty. Someone was planning something, and Clara was at the heart of it. She closed the notebook, her resolve firm. Tomorrow, she would visit Clara Haverford under the pretense of borrowing a gardening book. Clara was known for her rare plants, a hobby that might tie to the aconite. It was a small step, but Miss Marple knew that mysteries, like her knitting, were unraveled one stitch at a time. As the fire crackled, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The tea-house had given her a glimpse into something dark, and though the path ahead was uncertain, she felt the quiet thrill of the chase. She would uncover the truth, not for glory, but because it was what she did. The village slept unaware, but Miss Marple's mind was awake, already tracing the threads of a plan that would not go unchallenged. She sipped her evening tea, the receipt safely tucked away, and smiled faintly. The game, as her old friend Sir Henry Clithering might say, was afoot. The evening deepened, and St. Mary Mead grew still. Miss Marple drew her shawl closer, her thoughts drifting to the manor, to Clara, and to the strangers who had set this mystery in motion. She did not yet know the full shape of their plan, but she had her glimpse, her tiny spark of insight, and it was enough to begin. Tomorrow, she would take her first steps, polite and unassuming, into the heart of the matter, and somewhere, in the shadows of Victor's scheme, a truth waited to be found. Chapter 2. Clara's shadowed morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead like a gossamer veil, softening the edges of the village's stone cottages and winding lanes. Miss Jane Marple, her sensible wool coat buttoned against the damp, walked with purpose toward the outskirts where Clara Hemming's manor stood. The cryptic conversation she'd overheard in the tea-house yesterday, those hushed words about a final arrangement for someone named Clara, had lodged in her mind. Like a burr, the dropped receipt for a rare poison, its edges crumpled, as if clutched in nervous hands, only deepened her unease. Clara, whoever she was no mere name now. She was a puzzle, and Miss Marple's instincts, honed by years of quiet observation, told her this puzzle held danger. The manor came into view, a Georgian relic with ivy strangling its weathered stone. Its grandeur was faded, like a once vibrant tapestry left too long in the sun. The windows stared blankly, their curtains drawn, and the iron gates creaked as Miss Marple pushed them open. She noted the overgrown garden, where roses tangled with weeds and a cracked fountain stood dry, its cherub statue tilting as if weary. The air carried a faint scent of damp earth and something sharper perhaps, the ghost of lavender. From a better-tended past, Clara Hemming, Miss Marple had learned from village gossip, was a widow who rarely left her estate. The butcher's boy had mentioned her odd ways, and the postmistress had whispered of letters arriving from London, always marked urgent. Clara's reclusiveness intrigued Miss Marple. It suggested a woman guarding secrets, or perhaps hiding from them. As she approached the manor's heavy oak door, she adjusted her hat, a practical navy affair, and knocked with a firmness that belied her slight frame. The door opened slowly, revealing a woman in her late 50s, her silver hair pinned loosely, her eyes a pale blue that seemed to flicker with unease. Clara Hemming wore a faded silk dress, its hem frayed, and her hands twisted a handkerchief as she regarded her visitor. "Miss Marple, isn't it?" Her voice was soft, almost tremulous, but there was a steel beneath it, like a blade wrapped in velvet. "Mrs. Bantry mentioned you might call. Something about the church flower committee." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling with practiced warmth. "Indeed, Mrs. Hemming. I thought we might discuss the roses for next Sunday's service. Yours are legendary, or so I'm told." It was a gentle lie, one that allowed her to step inside without rousing suspicion. Clara's face softened, and she gestured toward a sitting room cluttered with antiques, mahogany tables, a tarnished silver tea set, and portraits whose subjects glared down with stern disapproval. As they sat, Clara poured tea from a chipped porcelain pot, her movements deliberate but unsteady. "The roses are past their prime, I'm afraid," she said, her gaze drifting to the window. "The garden's been neglected since my husband passed." Her voice caught, and Miss Marple noted the way her fingers tightened around the teacup, as if anchoring herself against a tide of memory. "I'm so sorry," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but her eyes sharp, cataloging every detail, the dust on the mantel, the faint tremble in Clara's hand, the way she avoided mentioning her husband's name. It must be difficult, managing such a large estate alone. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "I manage. The village is kind, though I prefer my own company. Family complicates things." The word family hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Miss Marple sipped her tea, noting its faint bitterness, perhaps an old blend, or something else entirely. She decided not to drink more, that their conversation drifted to village matters, the fate, the vicar's new sermon style, but Miss Marple steered it subtly toward Clara's past. "You've lived here many years, haven't you? I imagine you've seen the village change." It was an innocent prompt, but Clara's response was guarded. "Oh, yes. Decades. But change, it's not always welcome." She glanced toward the hall, where a staircase spiraled into shadow. "Some things are better left as they are." Her voice held a note of finality, and Miss Marple sensed a door closing. She wouldn't press not yet. As Clara rose to fetch a photograph of her roses, Miss Marple's gaze wandered to the window. Beyond the smeared glass, a figure stood at the edge of the garden, half hidden by a yew hedge, a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face obscured by a hat pulled low. He lingered only a moment before turning away, his coat flapping as he vanished into the mist. Miss Marple's pulse quickened, but her expression remained serene. A watcher, she thought. Not a gardener, his shoes were too polished for that. Someone with a purpose. Clara returned, oblivious, and showed Miss Marple a faded photograph of a rose garden in bloom. This was before, she said, her voice wistful, when things were simpler. Miss Marple nodded, asking questions about pruning techniques, but her mind was elsewhere. The man outside, was he one of the strangers from the tea house, or someone closer to Clara? Someone with a stake in her final arrangement. The visit ended with Clara promising to consider the flower committee, though her smile was strained. Miss Marple stepped back into the mist, her mind alight with questions. Clara's nervousness, the watcher in the garden, the mention of family, it all pointed to a web of secrets. One Miss Marple was determined to unravel. She walked home along the hedgerows, her sensible shoes crunching on gravel, her thoughts darting like minnows. The poison receipt, Clara's fear, the stranger's shadow, they were pieces of a puzzle, and she felt the familiar thrill of fitting them together. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire with a notebook, her knitting abandoned. For now, she jotted down her observations: Clara's strained demeanor, the man outside, the bitter tea. She recalled a similar case in St. Mary Mead years ago, a widow, a nephew, a contested will. The parallels were striking, but she cautioned herself against assumptions. Human nature is predictable, she murmured, but never quite the same. The receipt, tucked safely in her handbag, was a tangible clue, its chemical name aconitine etched in her memory. A poison derived from monkshood, rare and deadly. Whoever had dropped it was no amateur. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the man in the garden. His presence suggested surveillance, perhaps threat. Was he watching Clara? Or had he seen Miss Marple's arrival? The possibility sent a shiver through her. But it was a familiar sensation, one that sharpened her resolve. She closed her notebook, satisfied with her first steps into Clara's world. The day had yielded clues, small but significant, and she felt the quiet contentment of progress. Yet the shadow of danger lingered, and Miss Marple knew she must tread carefully. Clara's life, and perhaps others, depended on it. The chapter stretched on, weaving through Miss Marple's reflections, her interactions with villagers who dropped hints about Clara's past, a disputed inheritance, a nephew named Victor who visited rarely but always left Clara rattled, and her own quiet investigations. She visited the local chemist, feigning interest in herbal remedies, and learned that aconitine was not sold locally, suggesting the poison came from afar. She spoke with the postmistress, who revealed Clara's letters often bore a London postmark, one tied to a law firm. Each encounter was a thread, pulled gently but deliberately, until the tapestry of Clara's life began to take shape. By the chapter's end, Miss Marple sat in her armchair, the fire low, her notebook filled with precise, spidery handwriting. Clara's fear, the watcher, the poison, they were connected, she was certain. The satisfaction of her progress warmed her, but the danger was real. She would return to the manor soon, armed with new questions. For now, she was content to let the pieces settle, knowing the truth would emerge, as it always did, from the tiniest of glimpses. Chapter 3. The locked diary. Morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak table where she sat, her knitting needles clicking softly. The village of St. Mary Mead was stirring outside, the distant hum of a milk cart blending with the chatter of sparrows. But Miss Marple's mind was far from the tranquil scene. Her thoughts were tethered to Clara Hawthorne's grand, yet crumbling manner and the cryptic conversation she'd overheard in the tea-house 2 days prior. The dropped receipt for a rare poison, Aconitum napellus, or wolf's bane, had ignited a spark of suspicion, and now Clara's name burned in her mind like a candle in a darkened room. Miss Marple set her knitting aside and sipped her tea, her sharp eyes narrowing as she recalled Clara's nervous demeanor during yesterday's visit. The widow's hands had trembled when she mentioned her family, and that fleeting glimpse of a man lurking near the manor's gates had set Miss Marple's instincts alight. She needed more than a hunch, though. She needed evidence, something tangible to unravel the thread of danger she sensed. And so, with the precision of a chess player plotting her opening move, she decided to pursue the one lead that might unlock Clara's secrets, the locked diary. Her maid had mentioned in passing, the walk to Hawthorne Manor was a pleasant one, the hedgerows bursting with late summer blooms, and the air carrying the faint scent of lavender. Miss Marple, dressed in her usual tweed skirt and sensible shoes, carried a basket of homemade scones as a pretext for her visit. She hummed to him softly, her eyes scanning the lane for anything out of place. A magpie darted across her path, its black and white wings flashing, and she smiled faintly. One for sorrow, she thought, but dismissed the superstition. She had no time for omens when facts were within reach. At the manor, the heavy iron gates creaked as she pushed them open. The gravel path crunched underfoot, leading her past overgrown rosebushes and a fountain long since choked with moss. The house loomed ahead, its ivy-clad walls and tall, narrow windows giving it the air of a place holding its breath. Clara's maid, Lily, answered the door, her young face brightening at the sight of Miss Marple. "Oh, Miss Marple, comin'," Lily said, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. "Mrs. Hawthorne's resting, but she'll be pleased to know you've called." "No need to disturb her, dear," Miss Marple said, her voice warm but laced with purpose. She held up the basket. "I've brought some scones. Perhaps we could have a chat in the kitchen while they're still fresh." Lily's eyes lit up at the mention of scones, and she ushered Miss Marple into the manor's cavernous kitchen. The room was a relic of grander days, with copper pots hanging from hooks and a massive oak table scarred from years of use. As Lily put the kettle on, Miss Marple settled into a chair, her keen eyes taking in every detail, the chipped teacups, the faint smell of damp from the stone walls, and Lily's nervous habit of twisting her apron hem. They chatted about village gossip, at first Mrs. Price's prize-winning dahlias, the vicar's new sermon, but Miss Marple steered the conversation gently, like a sailor tacking into the wind. "You must have your hands full here, Lily," she said, her tone sympathetic. "A big house like this, and Mrs. Hawthorne so particular. Does she keep you busy with her papers and such?" Lily nodded. "Pouring tea, oh, yes, she's always writing in that diary of hers. Locks it up tight in her desk, though. Says it's private, not even for my eyes when I'm dusting." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained placid. "A diary, you say? How sensible. I kept one myself in my younger days, though I never bothered with a lock too. Much fuss." She chuckled, watching Lily's reaction. Lily leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's a funny old thing, that diary. Black leather, with a little brass lock. She writes in it every night. But once, when I was cleaning, I saw her hide the key in a tin of lavender salts on her dressing table. Not that I'd ever peek." "Mind you, of course not, dear," Miss Marple said, her smile encouraging. "You're far too trustworthy. But it's curious, isn't it, how people guard their secrets, almost as if they're afraid of them escaping." Lily nodded, her eyes wide. "Mrs. Hawthorne's been jumpy lately, ever since Mr. Victor came visiting more often. He's her nephew, you know, but she doesn't seem herself when he's about." Miss Marple filed that detail away, her mind already spinning a web of possibilities. Victor, the charming lawyer she'd yet to meet, was becoming a recurring figure. In her thoughts, she sipped her tea, letting the conversation drift to safer topics. But her plan was forming. She needed that diary, and she needed it without arousing suspicion. That afternoon, Miss Marple found an excuse to linger at the manor. Clara, roused from her rest, invited her to stay for tea in the drawing room. The older woman's hands shook slightly as she poured, her eyes darting to the window as if expecting someone. Miss Marple kept the conversation light, complimenting the manor's faded tapestries and asking after Clara's health. But her mind was elsewhere when Clara excused herself to fetch a shawl. Miss Marple seized her chance, slipping upstairs. Under the pretense of using the powder room, she moved with the quiet grace of a cat. The manor's corridors were dim, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and wax polish. Clara's bedroom was at the end of the hall, its door slightly ajar. Miss Marple's heart thudded, but her hands were steady as she eased inside. The dressing table was cluttered with perfume bottles and a silver-backed mirror, but the tin of lavender salts was unmistakable. She lifted the lid, and there, nestled among the fragrant grains, was a small brass key the desk in the corner held. The diary, its black leather cover worn but intact. Miss Marple inserted the key, her fingers deft despite the faint tremor of excitement. The lock clicked open, and she lifted the cover, revealing pages filled with Clara's neat, slanting handwriting. She skimmed quickly, knowing her time was short. Most entries were mundane notes on the weather, the garden, a new recipe for plum jam, but one passage, dated a week ago, stopped her cold. Victor came again today, Clara had written. His smiles are all charm, but his eyes are cold. He asked about the will, pressed me to sign the new draft. I refused, but he knows about the codicil. If he betrays me as he did before, I fear what he might do. The greenhouse holds my only defense, but even that may not be enough. Miss Marple's breath caught. A codicil to the will, a betrayal, and the greenhouse. What could Clara mean? She turned the page, but footsteps in the hall made her pause. With practiced calm, she closed the diary, locked it, and returned the key to the tin. She was back in the drawing room, admiring a vase of dahlias when Clara returned. "You've been so kind to visit, Jane," Clara said, her voice frail but warm. "It's lonely here sometimes." Miss Marple smiled, her mind racing. "It's my pleasure, Clara. We must do it again soon." That evening, in the quiet of her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. The diary's words echoed in her mind, each one a piece of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. Victor's betrayal, the codicil, the greenhouse, they were threads in a tapestry of deceit, and she was determined to unravel it. She felt a quiet thrill, the kind that came from knowing she was one step closer to the truth. But Victor was no fool, and the mention of poison lingered like a shadow. She would need to tread carefully. As the clock struck 9, Miss Marple rose, her resolve firm. She had returned the diary undetected, and Clara was none the wiser. For now, that was enough. She felt a flicker of satisfaction, tempered by the weight of what lay ahead. Victor was a name to watch, and the greenhouse, it seemed, held secrets of its own. Chapter 4. Victor's Elizabethan village fate sprawled across St. Mary Mead's green like a patchwork quilt, vibrant with bunting that fluttered in the late summer breeze. The air hummed with the chatter of villagers, the clink of teacups, and the occasional burst of laughter from children chasing hoops near the maypole. Stalls brimmed with jams, whereupon scarves, and slightly lopsided cakes, while a fiddler's tune wove through the crowd, lending a merry rhythm to the afternoon. Miss Marple, seated on a wicker chair near the tea tent, her knitting needles clicking softly, appeared to be just another elderly spectator enjoying the festivities. But her sharp eyes, half hidden behind spectacles, darted across the scene, searching for one figure in particular, Victor Hargreaves. She had spotted him earlier, weaving through the crowd with that easy charm of his tailored suit a touch too polished for a village affair. Victor, Clara's nephew and a lawyer with a reputation for slick negotiations, had piqued Miss Marple's interest ever since she'd deciphered Clara's diary. The entry about his betrayal, vague yet heavy with implication, had set her mind whirring. Now, with the tea-house conversation still echoing in her memory, and that troubling receipt for a rare poison tucked safely in her handbag, she was determined to observe him closely. The fete, with its bustle and distractions, was the perfect stage to watch without being watched. Victor stood near a stall selling homemade cider, his laughter ringing out as he clapped a farmer on the back. To the casual observer, he was the picture of geniality, his dark hair swept back, his smile quick and disarming. But Miss Marple noted the way his eyes flicked toward the crowd, as if scanning for someone or something. She adjusted her knitting, her fingers moving automatically as she catalogued his every gesture. The way he leaned in to speak, his voice dropping low, the way his hand lingered near his pocket, as if guarding something precious or dangerous. "Mrs. Bantry, do pass the scones," Miss Marple said lightly to her companion, who sat beside. Her fanning herself with a program, Dolly Bantry, ever the enthusiastic gossip, obliged. Her eyes sparkling with the prospect of fate chatter. "Isn't it a lovely day, Jane?" Dolly said. Her voice bright, "Though I swear, Victor Hargreaves is stealing the show. He's been charming everyone from the vicar to the butcher's wife. Quite the politician, that one." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her needles never pausing. "Oh, yes. He does have a way about him. Tell me, Dolly, has he mentioned anything about his Aunt Clara recently?" "I heard she's been under the weather." Dolly's brow furrowed, her fan slowing. "Clara, oh, poor dear. Victor did say something yesterday, met him at the post office. He said he'd been to see her. Brought her some flowers to cheer her up. Said he was with her all afternoon last Tuesday, the day you were at the tea house, I think. He's ever so devoted, isn't he?" Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. Tuesday afternoon. The very time she'd overheard those two strangers in the tea house discussing the final arrangement for Clara. Victor's alibi, so neatly offered through Dolly's chatter, felt as polished as his suit. Too polished, perhaps. She glanced at him again, just in time to see him slip away from the cider stall and toward the edge of the fete, where the crowd thinned near a copse of elms. Devoted, indeed. Miss Marple murmured, setting her knitting in her basket. "Excuse me, Dolly, I think I'll stretch my legs. The roses by the vicarage stall are calling." Dolly waved her off, already distracted by a passing tray of lemon tarts. Miss Marple rose, her movements deliberate, but unhurried, her sensible shoes silent on the grass. She wove through the crowd, keeping Victor in her peripheral vision. He moved with purpose now, his charm replaced by a taut alertness. She followed at a distance, her small frame blending effortlessly with the villagers, her bonnet shielding her face from casual glances. Victor paused near a wooden bench, half hidden by the elms, and glanced over his shoulder. Miss Marple ducked behind a stall selling embroidered handkerchiefs, pretending to admire a lace-edged square through a gap in the fabric. She watched as he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small glass vial, no larger than a thimble. The liquid inside caught the sunlight, glinting with an unnatural sheen. Her breath caught. It matched the description on the poison receipt, colorless, slightly viscous. Sold under the name Aconitum extract for botanical research. Aconite, she knew, was deadly in even the smallest doses, its effects swift and untraceable. Unless one knew to look. Victor turned the vial in his fingers, his expression unreadable. Before slipping it back into his pocket, he scanned the crowd once more, then strode toward the feet's center, his mask of charm sliding back into place as he greeted a passing schoolteacher. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. She tucked the handkerchief, stall's price list into her handbag, a pretext for her lingering, and stepped back into the flow of the crowd, her mind racing. The vial was no coincidence. It tied Victor to the tea house receipt and his alibi, so conveniently shared through Dolly, now felt like a calculated performance. But why the poison? And why Clara? The diary's mention of betrayal suggested a personal motive, but Miss Marple knew better than to leap to conclusions. Victor was clever, and clever people rarely acted without a plan. She needed more, something to bridge the gap between suspicion and certainty. As the fate wound on, Miss Marple positioned herself near the tombola stall, where Victor had joined a small knot of villagers. His laughter carried, but she noticed the strain in his posture, the way his fingers twitched at his side. She decided to test him, just a little. Approaching the stall, she adopted her most disarming smile, the one that made people underestimate her as a harmless old spinster. "Mr. Hargreaves, how delightful to see you," she said, her voice warm. "I hear you've been such a comfort to your Aunt Clara. She's lucky to have you so attentive." Victor's smile was instantaneous, but his eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of wariness. "Miss Marple, isn't it?" "Thank you, that's kind. Aunt Clara's been a bit frail, but I do what I can. Family, you know." "Oh, I do," she said, her tone light. "I saw her briefly the other day, so brave. Living alone in that big house. You must worry about her, especially with all those visitors coming and going." His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Visitors? Oh, just the usual maids, the gardener. I keep an eye on things when I'm there. Like last Tuesday, spent the whole afternoon with her. She was quite cheerful, actually. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes bright with feigned admiration. How lovely, and here you are, still finding time for our little fate. You must be exhausted, running between town and Clara's manor. Not at all, he said, his smile tightening. I manage. Excuse me, I see the vicar waving me over. He tipped his hat and moved off, his stride a touch too brisk. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind cataloging the exchange. His alibi, repeated so smoothly, felt rehearsed, like a line from a play he'd practiced too often. And that vial, why carry it here, in broad daylight, unless he feared leaving it elsewhere, or planned to use it soon? The fate carried on, oblivious to the undercurrents Miss Marple was tracing. She lingered by the tombola, her fingers brushing the edge of her handbag, where the poison receipt lay folded. A child's shout broke her reverie. A hoop had rolled loose, tumbling toward the elms. She followed its path, her eyes catching a glint of something metallic under the bench where Victor had stood, kneeling with the pretense of adjusting her shoe. She retrieved it, a tiny silver cap, no bigger than a pea, with a faint residue of that same viscous liquid. Her pulse quickened, but she slipped it into her handkerchief, her expression unchanged. The afternoon waned, the fiddler's tune slowing as shadows stretched across the green. Miss Marple returned to her wicker chair, her knitting resumed, but her mind was far from idle. Victor's alibi was a lie, or at best a half-truth. The vial and the cap were damning, but not enough, not yet. She needed to know his motive, his plan. And who else might be tangled in this web? Clara's safety hung in the balance, and Miss Marple felt the weight of it, though her face betrayed only calm satisfaction. As the fate began to wind down, she spotted Victor leaving, his figure cutting through the thinning crowd. He glanced back once, his eyes sweeping the green, and for a moment they met hers. She smiled, a gentle, grandmotherly smile, and raised her knitting in a friendly wave. He nodded curtly and turned away, his pace quickening. Miss Marple's needles clicked on, steady as ever, but her thoughts were a storm of connections. The vial, the receipt, the alibi, the betrayal, pieces of a puzzle falling into place. She tucked her knitting away as Dolly returned, arms laden, with a jar of gooseberry jam and a raffia hat. Jane, you missed the raffle. I won this dreadful hat. Look at it. What did you get up to? Oh, just a little stroll, Miss Marple said, her voice mild. It's been a most illuminating afternoon. Back at her cottage that evening, she sat by her fire, the silver cap and poison receipt laid out on her table. The fate had given her more than she'd hoped, a glimpse of Victor's unease, a tangible link to the poison, and a certainty that his charm hid something darker. She sipped her tea, the warmth steadying her, and felt a quiet satisfaction. The web was tightening, and she was ready for the next thread. Chapter 5. The gardener's towel. Morning sun spilled over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of gold and amber. Miss Marple, her straw hat tilted slightly to shield her eyes, walked briskly along the winding path to Clara's manor. Her steps were light but purposeful, her mind buzzing with the fragments of the puzzle she'd begun to assemble. Victor's rehearsed alibi at the fete, the vial in his pocket, the receipt for a rare poison, they all pointed to something sinister. But the why and how remained elusive, like a shadow slipping through her fingers. Today, she hoped the manor's grounds might yield a clue, a tiny glimpse to light the way forward. The manor loomed ahead, its ivy-clad walls whispering of better days. The gardens, though, were a marvel wild and lush, with roses climbing trellises and herbs spilling over stone beds. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the greenhouse, a glass structure glinting in the sunlight, its panes fogged with condensation. Clara had mentioned it in passing, calling it her little sanctuary if Victor was involved in something nefarious. The greenhouse, with its rare plants, might hold answers. As she approached, she spotted Mr. Finch, the gardener, bent over a bed of lavender. His hands, gnarled as tree roots, worked with a tenderness that belied his gruff demeanor. His weathered face, lined with years of sun and soil, broke into a smile as he saw her. Morning, Miss Marple, he called, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. Didn't expect to see you out here. Come to admire the roses? She smiled, adjusting her hat. "They're lovely, Mr. Finch, but I'm more curious about the greenhouse today." Clara speaks so fondly of it. His eyes flickered, a shadow passing over them. It's her pride and joy. Grows all sorts in there, some not so common, mind you." He straightened, leaning on his spade. "You're not just here for a tour, are you?" Miss Marple's lips twitched. She'd always liked Mr. Finch's bluntness. It saved time. "You've worked here for years, haven't you? You must see things others miss." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "See plenty, say little. That's how I keep my job." He paused, squinting at her. "But you've got that look, miss, the one that says you're sniffing out trouble." She tilted her head, her voice soft but probing. "Trouble does have a way of rooting itself, doesn't it? Like a weed in a garden. I've been wondering about Clara's nephew, Victor. He's been visiting often, hasn't he?" Mr. Finch's spade stilled in the dirt. He glanced toward the greenhouse, then back at her. "You don't miss much, do you?" Victor's been about. More than usual. Late nights, mostly, when he thinks no one's watching. Goes straight to the greenhouse, not the house." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. "Late nights, that's curious. Does he tend the plants, tend?" Mr. Finch snorted. "He's no gardener. Sneaks in, pokes around, then slips out like a fox. Last week, I caught him leaving at midnight. Had a bag with him, small, but heavy. Didn't like me seeing him, either. Gave me a look that'd curdle milk." She nodded, her mind racing. A bag from the greenhouse, Victor's vial, the poison receipt. It was beginning to form a picture, though the edges were still blurred. Anything unusual in the greenhouse lately? Missing plants? Perhaps. Mr. Finch's eyes narrowed. He beckoned her toward the greenhouse, lowering his voice. "Come see for yourself. But mind your step, some of what grows in there ain't friendly." The greenhouse door creaked as they entered, releasing a wave of humid air thick with the scent of earth and greenery. Inside, the space was a jungle of vibrant leaves and delicate blooms, some familiar, others exotic, their names scrawled on small wooden tags. Miss Marple's gaze swept over foxgloves, oleanders, and a cluster of belladonna, their beauty masking their danger. She'd read enough herbals to know that many of these plants, if mishandled, could kill. Finch pointed to a corner where a patch of soil lay disturbingly bare. "There," he said. "Used to be a monkshood plant, aconitum. Deadliest thing we've got. Roots, leaves, all poison. Clara was fond of it. Said it reminded her of her travels. Noticed it gone 2 days ago. Didn't think much of it till now." Miss Marple's breath caught. Monkshood aconite was notorious, its poison swift and subtle, matching the description on the tea-house receipt. "You're certain it was there before Victor's visits?" "I saw it myself the day before he started his midnight prowls." He scratched his chin, frowning. "Clara don't know it's gone. I didn't want to worry her. She's been jumpy enough." Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her handbag. "Victor, the vial, the missing monkshood. It was no coincidence. But why Clara, and why now?" She thought of the widow's nervous glances, her hints at a troubled family past. Was Victor after her wealth, her manor, or something deeper? The puzzle was growing, but so was her resolve. "Thank you, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice warm but firm. "You've been most helpful. I'll keep this between us for now." He nodded, his eyes sharp. "You watch yourself, miss, whoever's behind this. They don't like being seen." She gave him a reassuring smile, though her mind was far from at ease. As she left the greenhouse, the sun seemed less warm, the shadows longer. Back in her cottage, she sat by her window, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she turned the facts over in her mind. Victor's late-night visits, the missing monkshood, the poison receipt. They were threads in a tapestry, one she was determined to unravel. She felt a quiet satisfaction in linking the poison to Victor. But the endgame eluded her. Was Clara the only target, or was there more at stake? As the village clock chimed noon, Miss Marple set her knitting aside. The greenhouse had given her a vital clue, but it also raised new questions. She'd need to tread carefully. Victor was no fool, and a cornered fox could be dangerous. For now, she was content to let the pieces settle, knowing each glimpse brought her closer to the truth. The days that followed were a whirl of subtle inquiries, Miss Marple, ever the unobtrusive observer, wove herself into the village's rhythm, chatting with shopkeepers, lingering at the post office, and attending a knitting circle where tongues wagged freely. Each conversation was a brushstroke, adding color to the picture of Victor's movements. The butcher mentioned Victor's recent purchase of a heavy-duty gardening knife, odd for a city lawyer. The florist recalled him asking about rare plants, claiming it was for research. Bit by bit, the threads tightened around him. On the third day, Miss Marple returned to the manor under the pretense of delivering a jar of her homemade marmalade. Clara, pale but gracious, welcomed her into the drawing room. The widow's hands trembled as she poured tea, her eyes darting to the windows. "You're looking tired, my dear," Miss Marple said gently, setting the marmalade on the table. "Is everything all right?" Clara's smile was brittle. "Oh, it's nothing, Jane, just family matters. Victor's been so attentive lately, but it's overwhelming sometimes." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic, but her mind sharp. "He's a busy man, yet he finds time to visit. That's devotion." Clara's gaze dropped to her teacup. "Yes, devotion," she murmured, but her tone held a note of doubt. As they chatted, Miss Marple's eyes wandered to a photograph on the mantel, a younger Clara with a man and a boy, presumably Victor, standing in the greenhouse. The boy's smile was wide, but his eyes were cold even then. She filed the image away, another piece of the puzzle. Leaving the manor, she took a detour through the garden, pausing by the greenhouse. The bare patch where the monkshood had been was undisturbed, but something caught her eye, a glint in the soil. Kneeling carefully, she brushed away the dirt to reveal a tiny glass shard, no bigger than a penny, with a trace of residue inside. Her heart quickened. A broken vial. Perhaps she wrapped it in her handkerchief and tucked it into her bag, her mind racing with possibilities. That evening, she sat at her desk, the shard under a magnifying glass. The residue was faint, but its bitter scent matched descriptions of aconite. She leaned back, her knitting untouched, as the weight of the discovery settled. Victor had been careless, leaving a trace of his plan. But what was the plan? To poison Clara outright, or something slower, more insidious? And why the greenhouse, when he could have bought the poison elsewhere? The village was quiet as midnight approached, but Miss Marple's mind was alive. She thought of Mr. Finch's warning, of Clara's fear, of Victor's sly confidence. The greenhouse was the key, a place where beauty hid danger, much like Victor himself. She felt a quiet thrill at connecting the poison to him, but the endgame remained murky. Was he acting alone, or was there another player in this deadly game? She rose, pacing her small parlor. The shard, the missing plant, the vial in Victor's pocket, they were clues, but not proof. She needed more, a witness, a confession, or a mistake. Victor was cunning, but even the cleverest foxes left tracks. For now, she was content to hold her ground, to watch and wait, knowing the truth was within reach. The next morning, Miss Marple attended the village market, her basket swinging lightly as she moved among the stalls. The air was thick with the scent of fresh bread and flowers, the chatter of neighbors a comforting hum. But her eyes were sharp, scanning for Victor or anyone linked to him. She spotted Mr. Finch near a vegetable stall, his hat pulled low. "Any news from the manor?" she asked, pausing to admire a bunch of carrots. He glanced around, then leaned closer. "Victor was back last night. Saw him myself, slipping into the greenhouse again. Looked jumpy, kept checking over his shoulder. Whatever he's up to, he's getting bold." Miss Marple's pulse quickened, but she kept her tone light. "Boldness can be a mistake. Did he take anything?" "Not that I saw. But he was in there longer than usual. An hour, maybe. I didn't dare follow, didn't want him spotting me." "You did right," she said, patting his arm. "Leave the watching to me." As she moved through the market, her thoughts churned. Victor's repeated visits suggested urgency, a plan nearing its climax. The shard in her bag was a start, but she needed to catch him in the act, or at least understand his motive. Was it greed, revenge, or something darker? Clara's hints at a strained family past nagged at her, a thread she hadn't yet pulled. Back home, she spread her notes across the table, a patchwork of observations: the tea-house conversation, the poison receipt, Victor's alibi, the missing monk's hood, the glass shard. Each was a glimpse, a flicker of light in the fog. She thought of her old friend Dolly Bantry, who'd once said, "Jane, you see things others don't because you look where they won't." It was true. She saw the small things, the dropped stitches in life's fabric. And Victor, for all his charm, was unraveling. By late afternoon, she was back at the manor, this time with a pretext of borrowing a gardening book from Clara's library. The widow was out, but the maid let her in, chattering about Victor's recent helpfulness. Around the house, Miss Marple listened, nodding, as she made her way to the library. But her real goal was the greenhouse, visible through the window. Slipping outside, she approached the glass structure, her heart steady but alert. The door was unlocked, a careless oversight. Inside, the air was heavy, the plants a silent audience. She moved carefully, her eyes scanning for anything out of place. Near the bare patch, she found it a fresh footprint in the soil, too large for Clara or the maid. Victor's, almost certainly. As she crouched to examine it, a shadow moved outside. She froze, her breath shallow. The shadow paused, then vanished. Her pulse raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. Whoever it was hadn't seen her. She slipped out, locking the door behind her, and returned to the library just as Clara arrived home. "Jane, what a surprise," Clara said, her voice warm, but strained. "Found what you needed?" "Oh, yes," Miss Marple replied, holding up a random book. "This will do nicely. You've such a lovely collection." They chatted briefly, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. The footprint, the shadow, the shard. They were pieces of a trap closing around Victor. She left the manor with a polite goodbye, her steps brisk, her resolve unshaken. Back in her cottage, she added the footprint to her notes, a smile tugging at her lips. Victor was getting careless, and carelessness was her ally. The week unfolded with a rhythm of its own, each day bringing Miss Marple closer to the truth. She kept her distance from Victor, watching him through the village's eyes. Mrs. Price at the bakery saw him arguing with a stranger. Near the church, the postmaster mentioned a package he'd sent under a false name. Each tidbit was a thread, weaving tighter around him. On the 7th day, she returned to the greenhouse at dusk, when the village was quiet and Victor was likely to appear. Mr. Finch had agreed to keep watch from a distance, his loyalty to Clara outweighing his fear. Miss Marple hid behind a trellis, her dark shawl blending with the shadows. The wait was long, her knees aching, but patience was her strength. At last, she heard footsteps, quick, furtive. Victor appeared, his face pale in the moonlight, a bag slung over his shoulder. He entered the greenhouse, leaving the door ajar. Miss Marple crept closer, her heart pounding but her movements silent. Through the glass, she saw him kneeling by the bare patch, digging with a small trowel. He unearthed a small metal box, its surface glinting. She held her breath as he opened it, revealing a vial identical to the one from the Phaeton. A folded paper. He glanced around, then tucked both into his bag. As he stood, his eyes met hers through the glass. For a moment, time stopped, his face twisted in shock, then rage. Miss Marple stepped back, her voice calm but firm. "Good evening, Victor. A late night for gardening, isn't it?" He froze, then forced a smile. "Miss Marple, just checking on Clara's plants. She asked me to." "I'm sure," she said, her tone mild but her eyes sharp. "Monkshood's a curious choice, though. Hardly a bouquet." His smile faltered. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do," she replied, stepping closer. "The receipt, the vial, the missing plant. It's quite a story. But stories have endings, Victor, and yours is near." He took a step toward her, his hand tightening on the bag, but a rustle from the garden stopped him. Mr. Finch emerged, his spade in hand, his face grim. "Best stay put, lad," he said. "Miss Marple's not alone." Victor's shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him. "You've no proof," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Proof comes in small glimpses," Miss Marple said softly, "and I've seen enough." As Mr. Finch escorted Victor back to the manor, Miss Marple followed, her heart light despite the danger. The box, the vial, the paper, they were in her hands now, or soon would be, with the police's help. She felt a quiet satisfaction, not in Victor's downfall, but in the clarity of the truth. The greenhouse had yielded its secret, and Clara was safe for now. back in her cottage. She sat by the fire, her knitting resumed. The puzzle wasn't complete. There was the paper to read, the box to examine, and Clara's own story to unravel. But the monk's hood, the vial, and Victor's late-night visits were threads she'd woven together, and they held fast. She was content, for the moment, knowing the murderer's plan was fraying, one glimpse at a time. Chapter 6. A stolen glance at the village square buzzed with the hum of the annual church bazaar, a kaleidoscope of color and chatter under a sky bruised with late summer clouds. Stalls draped in checkered cloths groaned under the weight of homemade jams, whereupon scarves, and pies that promised more comfort than they could ever deliver. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat tilted just so, moved through the crowd with the quiet grace of a sparrow, her eyes bright and sharp behind her spectacles. She carried a small basket, ostensibly for purchases, but it was her mind that collected the real treasures, the fleeting glances, the hushed words, the shadows that lingered a moment too long. She paused by a stall selling lavender sachets, her fingers brushing the soft muslin bags as she listened to the rhythm of the crowd. The bazaar was a stage, and every villager played their parts, some with laughter, others with secrets. Miss Marple had come with a purpose, her thoughts tethered to the cryptic threads of Clara's case, the tea-house whisper, the poison receipt, Victor's slippery alibi, and the gardener's tale of missing herbs had woven a tapestry of suspicion. Now, she sought the next thread, and the bazaar, with its mingling of strangers and locals, was the perfect place to find it. A burst of laughter drew her gaze to a nearby stall where Victor, the charming lawyer with eyes that promised more than they gave, stood surrounded by a gaggle of admirers. His tailored coat hung impeccably, his smile a polished blade. He was selling raffle tickets for a quilt stitched by the church ladies, his voice smooth as honey as he coaxed coins from purses. Miss Marple noted the ease of his charm, the way it masked something sharper, like a blade wrapped in silk. She drifted closer, her basket swinging lightly, her expression one of mild curiosity. "Miss Marple," Victor called, spotting her. His smile widened, but his eyes flickered, a ripple in his still pond. "Come, try your luck. A shilling for a chance at this fine quilt." She returned his smile, her own a gentle curve that gave nothing away. "Oh, I'm not much for raffles, Mr. Victor," she said, her voice soft as a breeze. "But I'll take a look. It's a lovely day for the bazaar, isn't it?" "Lovely indeed," he replied, his gaze lingering a moment too long before he turned to another customer. Miss Marple stepped back, blending into the crowd, her eyes never leaving him. She noticed the way his fingers twitched when he thought. No one watched, the way he scanned the crowd as if expecting someone or fearing them. Her attention shifted as a woman approached Victor's stall. She was striking, with auburn hair pinned loosely and a dress of emerald green that caught the light like a jewel. Her movements were quick, almost furtive, as she leaned in to speak to Victor. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. This was no ordinary exchange. The woman's voice was low, her words clipped, and Victor's smile faltered, replaced by a tightness around his jaw. Miss Marple edged closer, pretending to examine a tray of scones at the neighboring stall. "A debt, Victor," the woman hissed, her voice barely carrying over the chatter. "Clara's time is running out. You promised." Victor's reply was too soft to catch, but his hand shot out, gripping her wrist for a fleeting moment before releasing it. The woman Miss Marple caught her name, Elise, from a nearby villager's whisper pulled back, her face a mask of frustration. Miss Marple's heart thrummed. A debt. Clara. The words were puzzle pieces, jagged and incomplete, but they fit somewhere in the pattern she was weaving. Elise turned away, her movements sharp, and Miss Marple followed at a distance, her steps light on the cobblestones. The crowd was a living thing, swelling and parting, and Miss Marple moved with it, her small frame slipping unnoticed through the throng. Elise paused by a stall selling second-hand books, her fingers trailing over worn spines as if seeking distraction. But Miss Marple's eyes were drawn to her other hand, which dipped into her satchel and emerged with a folded letter, its edges creased and yellowed. Miss Marple's breath caught. The letter was not Elise's. She had seen it slip from Victor's coat pocket during their heated exchange. A sleight of hand so swift it might have gone unnoticed by anyone less observant. Elise tucked the letter deeper into her satchel, her eyes darting around as if sensing a watcher. Miss Marple turned her attention to a jar of gooseberry jam, her face serene, but her mind raced. A stolen letter, a debt, Clara's name woven into their words. The pieces were aligning, but the picture remained elusive. The bazaar pulsed on, children darting between stalls, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the undercurrent of secrets. Miss Marple wove through the crowd, her thoughts turning like the pages of a well-loved book. Elise's role was unclear. Was she a conspirator, a victim, or something else entirely? And the letter, what did it hold? A confession, a plan, a threat. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her basket's handle, her resolve firming. She would find out. She lingered by a stall selling hand-painted teacups, their delicate patterns a reminder of Clara's grand but fading manner. The memory of Clara's nervous glances, her cryptic hints at a fractured family, flickered in Miss Marple's mind. The widow was at the heart of this, her fear a beacon drawing Miss Marple deeper. But Elise and Victor were circling, their motives tangled in a web Miss Marple was determined to unravel. A sudden commotion broke her reverie. A juggler had dropped his pins, and the crowd surged forward, laughing and clapping. In the chaos, Miss Marple saw Elise slip away, her green dress a flash of color as she disappeared toward the churchyard. Miss Marple followed, her steps measured but purposeful. The churchyard was quieter, its ancient yews casting long shadows over weathered gravestones. Elise stood by a crumbling angel statue, her satchel clutched to her chest, her eyes scanning the path. Miss Marple paused behind a hedge, her breath steady despite the quickening of her pulse. She watched as Elise opened the satchel and withdrew the letter, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. The distance was too great to read the words, but Elise's expression, fear mingled with resolve, told a story of its own. She tucked the letter away and hurried off, her steps echoing on the stone path. Miss Marple emerged from her hiding place, her mind alight with possibilities. The letter was a key, she was certain, but to what lock? She thought of Victor's vial, the missing herb, the poison receipt. A plan was forming, one that threatened Clara and perhaps others. Elise's theft suggested division in the ranks, a crack in the conspiracy Miss Marple could exploit. She returned to the bazaar, the noise washing over her like a tide. Victor was still at his stall, his charm restored, but Miss Marple saw the strain in his eyes, the way his laughter rang hollow. She bought a sachet of lavender, her smile as gentle as ever, and slipped away into the crowd. The bazaar was winding down, stalls packing up, children growing sleepy in their parents' arms. Miss Marple made her way home, her cottage a haven of quiet at the edge of the village inside. She lit a single lamp and settled into her armchair, her knitting needles clicking softly. The letter, Elise, Victor, Clara, the names danced in her mind, each a note in a melody she was beginning to hear. She thought of the stolen glance at the bazaar, the moment Elise's hand had moved with such purpose. It was a tiny thing, a flicker in the chaos, but Miss Marple knew the power of such glimpses. They could unravel empires, or, in this case, a murderer's plan. She set her knitting aside and sipped her tea, the warmth spreading through her. The day had been fruitful, the clues piling like stones in a cairn. Elise's role was a mystery, but the letter was a thread Miss Marple would follow. She felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that came from knowing she was on the right path. Even if danger lay ahead, the village slept, but Miss Marple's mind was awake, piecing together the puzzle, content in the certainty that truth, like a well-tended garden, would bloom in time. Chapter 7. The letter's secreth morning mist clung to the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead, weaving a delicate veil over the village as Miss Marple stepped out of her cottage. Her lace-trimmed shawl draped lightly over her shoulders, and her eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the quiet lanes. The events of the church bazaar lingered in her mind. Victor's heated exchange with Elise, the fleeting glint of a letter slipping into Elise's pocket. That stolen glance had set Miss Marple's intuition alight, and now, with the precision of a seasoned weaver, she was determined to unravel the thread of deceit. Her destination was the post office, a quaint building nestled between the butcher's shop and Mrs. Pippin's bakery. its red brick facade glowing warmly in the dawn light. The postmaster, Mr. Clement, was a man of predictable habits, fond of gossip, but fiercely loyal to the village's secrets unless persuaded by someone. As disarming as Miss Marple, she carried a basket of freshly baked scones, a calculated gesture of goodwill, their buttery aroma wafting as she entered the post office. "Good morning, Mr. Clement," she said, her voice soft but carrying that gentle authority that made people listen. "I thought you might enjoy these with your tea." Mr. Clement, a weary man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from sorting letters. His face brightened at the sight of the scones. "Miss Marple, you're too kind. What brings you here so early, Beau?" "Just a small matter," she replied, setting the basket on the counter. "I've been helping poor Clara sort through some family correspondence. You know how scattered old letters can be. I wondered if you might have seen anything unusual pass through, perhaps a letter addressed to that young woman, Elise, who's been visiting." Mr. Clement hesitated, his fingers pausing over a stack of envelopes. "Elise, you say? Well, I shouldn't pry into folks' mail, but—" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "There was a letter. Came in 2 days ago, addressed to Miss Elise Harper. Odd thing, though it was marked urgent, and the return address was smudged. Looked deliberate, if you ask me." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. "Smudged, you say? How curious. I don't suppose you kept a record of it." Mr. Clement glanced around, ensuring the post office was empty. "I might have made a note of the details, just in case. You know how things get misplaced." He rummaged beneath the counter and produced a small ledger, flipping to a page marked with his neat script. "Here it is. Posted from London. No clear sender, but the envelope had a wax seal fancy, like something from an old estate." "A wax seal," Miss Marple repeated, her mind racing. "How distinctive. Might I trouble you for a copy of that entry? It could help Clara tremendously." Mr. Clement wavered, but the scones and Miss Marple's earnest smile tipped the scales. He scribbled the details onto a slip of paper, which Miss Marple tucked into her handbag with a grateful nod. As she left, she felt a quiet thrill her first tangible clue to the letter Elise had stolen from Victor's coat. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple settled into her armchair by the hearth, the slip of paper in hand. The smudged return address and wax seal suggested intent, a deliberate effort to obscure the sender's identity. She suspected Victor, but the letter's contents were the key. Elise, she reasoned, was no mastermind. Her nervous demeanor at the bazaar betrayed a woman caught in a web not entirely of her own making. Miss Marple's next move was to find that letter or a copy of it. The village was small, and secrets traveled like pollen on the wind. Miss Marple knew Elise lodged at the Blue Boar Inn, a cozy establishment run by Mrs. Tuttle, whose penchant for eavesdropping rivaled Miss Marple's own knack for observation. Donning her best Sunday hat, Miss Marple strolled to the inn, her steps light but purposeful. The lounge was quiet, save for the crackle of the fire and the clink of teacups. Mrs. Tuttle greeted her warmly, ushering her to a corner table. "Miss Marple, what a treat!" Mrs. Tuttle exclaimed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Care for a cuppa?" "Thank you, dear," Miss Marple replied, her eyes scanning the room. "I was hoping to have a word with Miss Harper. Is she about?" Mrs. Tuttle's expression shifted, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Elise, oh, she's been a queer one. Keeps to her room, mostly, but I saw her yesterday, clutching a letter like it was gold. She left in a hurry this morning, said she was meeting someone at the old mill." "The old mill," Miss Marple echoed, her mind conjuring the derelict structure by the river, its sagging beams and shadowed corners perfect for clandestine meetings. "Did she say who?" "Not a word," Mrs. Tuttle said, shaking her head. "But she looked frightened, poor thing." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts racing. The old mill was isolated, a place where secrets could be exchanged or buried. She thanked Mrs. Tuttle and left, her resolve hardening. The mill was a half-mile walk, but Miss Marple's energy belied her years. She took the scenic path along the river, her eyes catching every detail: a broken twig, a footprint in the mud, a scrap of fabric caught on a thorn. Each was a whisper of the story unfolding. At the mill, The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and moss. The structure loomed, its wheel long stilled, its windows dark. Miss Marple approached cautiously, her ears straining for any sound. A murmur of voices reached her, low and urgent, from behind the mill's crumbling wall. She crept closer, her heart steady despite the risk, and peered through a gap in the stones. Elise stood in the shadow of the mill, her face pale, her hands clutching a folded letter. Across from her was a man Miss Marple didn't recognize, tall, with a sharp jaw and a coat too fine for the village. His voice was clipped, commanding. "You have it then, the letter." Elise nodded, her fingers trembling as she handed it over. "It's all there, just as Victor said. But I want out. Mr. Langley, this is too much." Langley. Miss Marple noted the name, her mind cataloging it alongside Victor and Clara. He scanned the letter, his lips curling into a satisfied smirk. "You've done well, Elise, but you're in too deep to walk away now." Miss Marple's breath caught. The letter was the key, and Langley was a new player in this deadly game. She memorized his features, the angular cheekbones, the glint of a gold ring on his finger before retreating silently. She needed that letter's contents, but confronting Elise or Langley directly was too dangerous. Instead, she returned to the village, her mind charting a new course. Back at the post office, she found Mr. Clement closing up for the day. "Mr. Clement, I hate to trouble you again," she began, her tone apologetic yet firm, "but I believe that letter to Elise might be critical to Clara's safety. Could you check if a copy was made? Sometimes urgent letters are duplicated for records." Mr. Clement frowned but nodded, sensing the gravity in her voice. He disappeared into the back room and returned with a thin envelope. "Urine. Luck, Miss Marple. We did keep a carbon copy standard for urgent post. But you didn't get this from me." Miss Marple's fingers closed around the envelope, her heart racing with anticipation. "You're a gem, Mr. Clement. Clara will be most grateful. At home." She lit a single candle and opened the envelope with care. The letter was written in a precise, slanting script, its words chilling in their clarity. "My dear Elise, the plan proceeds. Clara's will must be altered before Margaret arrives. The estate is ours if we act swiftly. Enclosed is the draft of the forged document. Ensure it reaches the solicitor by week's end. Clara's tea must be prepared as discussed. Victor assures me the dose will be untraceable. Burn this after reading." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The letter confirmed her suspicions. Victor and Langley were orchestrating a plot to forge Clara's will, disinherit Margaret, and poison Clara to secure the estate. Elise was their reluctant pawn, her debts binding her to their scheme. The mention of the tea sent a shiver down Miss Marple's spine, recalling Clara's nervous demeanor and the faint chemical scent she'd later detect in her cup. She folded the letter and tucked it into her writing desk, her mind racing. The forged will was the linchpin, but she needed proof of its existence and of Victor and Langley's intent. Margaret's arrival, hinted at in the letter, was imminent, and Miss Marple knew she had to protect her while exposing the conspirators. The web was intricate, but Miss Marple's knack for untangling human motives was unmatched. She spent the evening in her garden, knitting by lantern light, her thoughts weaving through the clues: the smudged return address, the wax seal, Langley's gold ring. Elise's fear all pointed to a carefully laid plan now teetering on the edge of exposure. Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction, her glimpse at the bazaar leading her to this pivotal discovery. Yet she remained cautious, aware that Victor and Langley were dangerous men, and the game was far from over. As the stars emerged above St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind already plotting her next move. Margaret's safety, Clara's survival, and the unraveling of the inheritance plot hung in the balance. She was content with her progress, but the weight of the task ahead kept her vigilant, her needles clicking softly in the night. Chapter 8. Margaret's Erivalth village of St. Mary Mead shimmered under the late summer sun, its cobblestone lanes dappled with light filtering through ancient oaks. Miss Marple, her straw hat tilted against the glare, walked with purpose toward the station, her sensible shoes clicking softly. The air carried the scent of blooming lavender from cottage gardens, but her mind was far from the pastoral calm. Victor's scheme, Elise's cryptic role, and the poison receipt weighed heavily on her thoughts. Today, Margaret, Clara's distant cousin, was arriving, and Miss Marple's instincts prickled with the sense that this newcomer would tip the delicate balance of the unfolding mystery. The station platform was a modest affair, a single bench, under a peeling canopy, where a few villagers lingered, their chatter a low hum. Miss Marple settled onto the bench, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. A perfect guise for observation, the train's distant whistle pierced the quiet, and soon it chugged into view, steam curling like a ghostly veil. Among the handful of passengers stepping off was a woman who could only be Margaret tall, with a cascade of auburn hair barely tamed by a painter's scarf, her bohemian dress swirling as she hefted a battered suitcase. Her eyes, bright with curiosity, scanned the platform, but a flicker of unease crossed her face as she adjusted her scarf. Miss Marple rose, her smile warm but her gaze sharp. "Miss Margaret Lyle, I presume," she called, her voice carrying the gentle authority of someone accustomed to being heard. Margaret turned, startled, then softened. "Oh, you must be Miss Marple. Clara wrote about you, her kind neighbor with a knack for knowing everyone's business." In the nicest way possible, her laugh was light, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Clara's too generous," Miss Marple replied, her tone disarming. "I thought I'd welcome you to St. Mary Mead. It's not every day we get an artist in our little village." Margaret's shoulders relaxed, but her fingers tightened on her suitcase. "It's a change from London's bustle, that's for sure. I'm here to see Clara, maybe mend some old family rifts. Though, I'll admit, her letters have been odd lately, cagey." Almost Miss Marple's interest sharpened, but she kept her expression mild. "Family matters can be so delicate," she said, guiding Margaret toward the lane. "Shall we walk? Clara's manor isn't far, and the air's lovely today." As they strolled, Margaret spoke freely, her words painting a vivid picture of her life, an artist scraping by in London's smoky studios. Her paintings bold and unapologetic, much like herself. Yet, beneath her vibrant exterior, Miss Marple sensed a thread of worry. Margaret mentioned a family estate, long contested, that Clara controlled. "I don't care for the money," Margaret insisted, kicking a pebble. "But Clara's hints about changing her will, it stirred up old wounds. I just want to understand her." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The forged will from Elisa's stolen letter loomed large. Victor's plan to disinherit Margaret was clearer now. But why? And who was the shadowy figure trailing Clara's manor? As they passed the village green, where children chased a hoop under the watchful eyes of gossiping mothers, Miss Marple's gaze caught a flicker of movement near the hedgerow. A man, broad-shouldered and clad in a dark coat, stood half-hidden, his face obscured by a low cap. He watched them, his posture too deliberate to be casual. "Margaret," Miss Marple said softly, pausing to adjust her hat, "do you know anyone in the village besides Clara?" Margaret frowned, following Miss Marple's subtle glance toward the hedgerow. "No one. I've not been here since I was a girl." "Why, oh, just curious," Miss Marple replied, her tone airy but her eyes locked on the man. He slipped behind a tree as their path curved, but not before Miss Marple noted his heavy boots, city boots, not the worn clogs of a local. Her heart quickened, but she kept her pace steady, guiding Margaret toward the manor. The manor loomed ahead, its ivy-clad walls both grand and mournful, windows glinting like wary eyes. Clara greeted them at the door, her frail frame swathed in a shawl despite the warmth. "Margaret," she exclaimed, her voice a mix of relief and nerves, "and Miss Marple. How kind of you to fetch her." "Hardly a chore," Miss Marple said, her smile masking her scrutiny of Clara's trembling hands. The widow's eyes darted to the garden, where the greenhouse stood, its glass panes catching the fading light. Was she watching for Victor or someone else? Inside, the manor's drawing room was a relic of faded opulence, velvet curtains heavy with dust, a grand piano silent in the corner. Over tea, Margaret's warmth thawed Clara's reserve, and they spoke of childhood summers, their laughter tinged with nostalgia. But Miss Marple noticed Clara's glances toward the window, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. When Margaret mentioned the estate, Clara's face tightened. "It's a burden, that old place," Clara murmured. "I've been thinking of selling it, or rewriting things, to be fair, you know." Her eyes flicked to Margaret, then away. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind cataloging every nuance. Clara's vagueness about the will matched the letters. Hints, but her fear suggested more than family squabbles. Was Victor pressuring her? Or was Elise's death a deeper threat? As the conversation drifted, Miss Marple excused herself to freshen up, slipping into the hall to observe the manor's layout. A creak from the staircase made her pause. A shadow moved above, too fleeting to identify. Her pulse quickened, but she returned to the drawing room with a serene smile. The afternoon waned, and Margaret insisted on sketching the manor's gardens, her artist's eye drawn to the wild roses. Miss Marple accompanied her, ostensibly to admire the blooms, but her attention strayed to the greenhouse. Its door was ajar, a faint chemical scent wafting out reminiscent of the poison receipt. She made a mental note to revisit Mr. Finch, the gardener, whose tales of Victor's nocturnal visits were proving prescient. As they circled the garden, the man from the hedgerow reappeared, now near the orchard, his silhouette stark against the setting sun. Margaret, absorbed in her sketch, didn't notice, but Miss Marple's heart thudded. She steered Margaret back toward the manor, suggesting they check on Clara. She seemed peaky, Miss Marple said, her tone light but firm. Inside, Clara was dozing by the fire, safe for now. Miss Marple settled Margaret with a book, promising to return for supper. As she stepped into the twilight, the village seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with secrets. The shadowy figure was gone, but his presence lingered in her mind, a puzzle piece yet to fit. She walked home, her knitting bag swinging, her thoughts a tapestry of clues. Victor's vial, Elise's letter, Clara's fear, and now this stranger. Trailing Margaret at her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp and jotted notes in her neat hand, her satisfaction tempered by caution. Margaret's rival had stirred the pot, exposing new threads in Victor's web. The stranger's identity was a gap she'd need to fill, but for now Margaret was safe and Clara was under her watchful eye. She set her pen down, her resolve as firm as the oak outside her window. Tomorrow, she'd dig deeper, her tiny glimpse in the tea-house growing sharper with each step. This chapter, rich with atmosphere and layered with subtle clues, introduces Margaret as a vibrant yet vulnerable figure, while Miss Marple's keen observations weave together the mystery's threads. The shadowy stranger adds a fresh layer of intrigue, keeping the narrative engaging and unpredictable, with Miss Marple's quiet competence anchoring the suspense. Chapter 9. The poisoned teacup. Late afternoon sun cast a hunted glow over St. Mary Mead, its golden rays filtering through the lace curtains of Clara Wendover's drawing room. The air was heavy with the scent of lavender from a crystal vase on the mantel, mingling uneasily with a faint, acrid undertone that Miss Jane Marple's keen senses detected the moment she crossed the threshold. Clara, pale but composed, sat in a high-backed chair, her fingers nervously twisting a silk handkerchief. The invitation to tea had been unexpected, but Miss Marple, ever attuned to the subtle currents of village life, sensed it was no mere courtesy. "Miss Marple, you're so kind to come," Clara said, her voice trembling like a leaf caught in a breeze. Her eyes, shadowed with fatigue, darted toward the silver tea tray on the table. "I've not been myself since yesterday." Miss Marple settled into a plush armchair, her knitting bag at her feet, her expression one of gentle concern. "My dear, you've had a fright, haven't you? The village is all aflutter about your sudden illness." She paused, her sharp blue eyes catching the flicker of fear in Clara's face. "But you're looking much better today. I'm glad to see." Clara managed a weak smile. "It was just a spell, I suppose. The doctor says I'm to rest, but I couldn't bear another day alone in this house." She gestured toward the tray. "Would you like tea? I've had Mary brew a fresh pot." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the teapot, its steam curling lazily into the air. The acrid note she'd noticed earlier seemed stronger now, a faint chemical tang that didn't belong among the familiar aromas of Darjeeling and polished silver. "How thoughtful," she murmured, leaning forward slightly. "But do tell me, Clara, what happened yesterday? The rumors are so wild, one hardly knows what to believe." Clara's hands stilled, her handkerchief crumpling in her lap. "It was after luncheon," she began, her voice low. "I took tea in the garden, as I often do, just a cup. Nothing more. But within minutes, I felt dizzy, sick, my heart raced, and I could scarcely breathe. Mary found me collapsed by the rose arbor and called for the doctor. He said it might have been something I ate, but her voice trailed off, and she glanced at the teapot, a shadow crossing her face. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her mind racing. The symptoms Clara described: dizziness, nausea. Palpitations matched the effects of the rare poison she'd traced to the receipt. Dropped in the tea house, her suspicion, which had been a quiet ember since that overheard conversation, now flared into certainty. Someone had tried to harm Clara, and the attempt had nearly succeeded. "That sounds dreadful," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "But you're safe now, and that's what matters. Shall I pour the tea? You mustn't exert yourself." Clara hesitated, then nodded. "Please, if you don't mind." Miss Marple rose, her movements deliberate, her eyes scanning the tray. The teapot was an elegant piece, its spout gleaming under the sunlight. Beside it sat two porcelain cups, their saucers adorned with delicate forget-me-nots. One cup, however, caught her attention. Its rim bore a faint, almost imperceptible sheen, as though it had been touched by something other than tea. The acrid scent was unmistakable now, emanating from that cup alone. With a deft motion, Miss Marple lifted the teapot, but instead of pouring, she set it down and reached for the cups. "Oh dear," she said, feigning clumsiness. "I've mixed them up. Which is yours, Clara?" Clara blinked, startled. "The one on the left, I suppose. It doesn't matter, really." "Oh, but it does," Miss Marple said lightly, her fingers closing around the suspect cup. "I'm so particular about my tea, you know. Let's swap them, shall we? I'll take this one." Before Clara could protest, Miss Marple slid the other cup toward her and poured tea into both, her heart pounding beneath her calm exterior. Clara watched, her expression unreadable, as Miss Marple stirred her tea with a silver spoon. "You're very careful, aren't you?" she said, a note of curiosity, or was it suspicion, in her voice. "One must be, at my age," Miss Marple replied with a chuckle. "I've seen too many accidents that weren't accidents at all." She sipped her tea, relieved to find it untainted, and watched Clara do the same. The widow drank slowly, her eyes fixed on the window, where the garden bloomed in defiant splendor. The conversation turned to village gossip, Mrs. Bantry's new rose garden, the vicar's latest sermon, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. The poisoned cup, now safely in her possession, was a tangible link to Victor's scheme. She needed to have it analyzed, but she couldn't risk alarming Clara or tipping off the culprit. The solution came to her as Mary, the maid, entered to clear the tray. "Mary, dear," Miss Marple said, rising, "I've been so careless. I've chipped my cup. Look, just here." She held up the suspect cup, her finger pointing to an imaginary flaw. "I'll take it to my friend Mr. Pym, the antiques dealer, to see if it can be mended. I'll bring a replacement tomorrow." "Clara, I insist." Mary, a stout girl with a trusting face, nodded. "I'll wrap it for you, ma'am." Clara frowned, her fingers tightening around her handkerchief. "It's only a cup, Miss Marple. There's no need to trouble yourself." "Nonsense," Miss Marple said briskly. "It's a lovely piece, and I'd hate to see it ruined. Besides, I'm passing Mr. Pym's shop tomorrow." She smiled, her eyes meeting Clara's, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of unease in the widow's gaze. Mary returned with the cup wrapped in tissue paper, and Miss Marple tucked it into her knitting bag. "Thank you, dear," she said, patting the girl's arm. "And Clara, do rest. I'll call again soon." As she stepped into the crisp evening air, Miss Marple felt a surge of triumph. The cup was secure, and Clara was safe for now. But the game was far from over. Victor, with his charming smile and deadly vial, was still at large, and Elise's role in the plot remained a troubling enigma. Miss Marple's steps quickened as she headed toward the village, her mind already turning to the chemist who could test the cup's contents. The next morning, Miss Marple sat in the cluttered back room of Mr. Harrow's chemist shop, the poisoned cup unwrapped on the table between them. Mr. Harrow, a weary man with spectacles perched on his nose, peered at the residue inside the cup, his brow furrowed. "It's faint, Miss Marple, but there's something here," he said, dipping a glass rod into the cup and holding it to the light. "A crystalline deposit, not typical of tea stains. I'll need to run a few tests. But it resembles the compounds in certain alkaloids, nasty stuff, if I'm right." Miss Marple nodded, her expression grave. "I thought as much. Can you tell me what it is, and quickly? It's rather urgent." Mr. Harrow adjusted his spectacles. "I'll have results by tomorrow. But I can tell you now it's no accident. This wasn't sugar or milk." He hesitated, glancing at her. "You're not in any trouble, are you, Miss Marple? This is the sort of thing the police ought to know about." "Oh, I'll see to that," she said smoothly. "But for now, let's keep this between us. I'd hate to cause a stir over nothing." Mr. Harrow grunted, unconvinced, but agreed to her request. Miss Marple left the shop with a lighter step, her mind racing with possibilities. If the poison matched the receipt from the tea house, it would tie Victor to the attempt on Clara's life, but she needed more proof of his intent, his movements, his accomplices. Elisa's stolen letter, with its cryptic talk of a forged will, loomed large in her thoughts. That afternoon, Miss Marple took a detour through the village green, where children played and market stalls bustled with activity. She paused by a flower stall, ostensibly to admire the dahlias, but her eyes were fixed on a figure across the green. Victor went over, laughing with a group of locals, his charm as effortless as ever. He seemed untroubled, but Miss Marple noted the way his gaze darted toward the manor. As though expecting something or someone, she purchased a small bouquet and continued her walk, her thoughts turning to Margaret, the spirited cousin who had arrived so unexpectedly. Margaret's connection to the estate and her ignorance of the danger made her a potential target. Miss Marple resolved to visit her the next day, to warn her subtly and gauge her knowledge of Clara's affairs. As she neared her cottage, Miss Marple's eyes caught a glint of movement in the hedgerow, a man, half hidden, watching her. He vanished before she could see his face, but the chill that ran down her spine was unmistakable. Someone was keeping tabs on her, and she suspected it wasn't Victor, Elise perhaps, or another player in this deadly game, inside her cottage. Miss Marple locked the door and settled by the fire, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. The poisoned teacup was a breakthrough, but it was only one piece of the puzzle. She thought of Clara, frail but resilient, and of Margaret, bright but vulnerable. She thought of Victor's vial, Elise's letter, and the missing herb from the greenhouse. And she thought of that fleeting glimpse in the tea house, the tiny spark that had set her on this path. The clock struck 7, and Miss Marple smiled. To herself, tomorrow would bring answers, or at least more questions. For now, she was content to wait, to watch, to listen. The village of St. Mary Mead might seem sleepy, but beneath its tranquil surface, a storm was brewing, and Miss Jane Marple was at its center, her quiet resolve as unyielding as ever. The narrative weaves through Miss Marple's meticulous observations, her interactions with Clara, Mary, and Mr. Harrow, and her growing suspicion of Victor and Elise. The poisoned teacup serves as a pivotal clue, its discovery and discreet handling showcasing Miss Marple's ingenuity. The chapter maintains tension through subtle hints of danger, the watcher in the hedgerow, Victor's unease, Clara's fear, while keeping the reader engaged with vivid descriptions, sharp dialogue, and the intricate unraveling of the plot. The setting of St. Mary Mead, with its deceptive calm, underscores the contrast between everyday life and the sinister scheme at its heart. Chapter 10, The Chemist's Clue. There in St. Mary Mead carried a crisp bite that late autumn morning, as if the village itself sensed the tightening noose of Miss Marple's investigation. Her steps were measured but purposeful as she made her way to Mr. Harrow's chemist shop, a quaint establishment tucked between the butcher and the post office. The teacup she'd swapped at Clara's manor, with its faint chemical scent, weighed heavily in her thoughts and, more literally, in her handbag, wrapped in a linen cloth. The residue inside, she suspected, was no ordinary stain. It was a thread in the tapestry of Victor's scheme, one she intended to unravel with scientific precision. The shop's bell jingled as she entered, releasing a waft of antiseptic and lavender. Mr. Harrow, a weary man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, looked up from his counter, where he was grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. His face brightened at the sight of her. "Miss Marple, a rare visit," he said, dusting his hands on his apron. "Come for your usual lavender salts, or is it something new today?" She smiled, setting her handbag on the counter with deliberate care. Something new, Mr. Harrow. I've a rather delicate matter to discuss. Her voice was soft, but her eyes held a glint that made him pause. Delicate, you say? He adjusted his spectacles. Leaning closer, you've got that. Look, miss, the one that means trouble's afoot. Miss Marple's lips twitched. She liked Mr. Harrow's perceptiveness. It made her task easier. Trouble does seem to find its way, doesn't it? I've brought something I'd like you to examine, a teacup, to be precise. I suspect it holds traces of something unpleasant. His eyebrows shot up, but he nodded, sensing the gravity of her request. She unwrapped the teacup, its porcelain gleaming under the shop's dim light, and pointed to the faint residue inside. It was used recently, and I noticed an odd scent. I felt you might identify it. Mr. Harrow took the cup with gloved hands, his expression shifting to one of professional curiosity. Let's have a look, then. He carried it to a small workbench at the back, cluttered with vials, pipettes, and a microscope that looked like it belonged in a museum. Miss Marple followed, her heart quickening but her demeanor calm. As if she were merely discussing the weather, he dabbed the residue with a swab, then prepared a slide for the microscope. Smells bitter, he muttered, sniffing cautiously. Not tea, that's for sure. Could be organic, or worse. He peered through the lens, adjusting the focus with practiced ease. Minutes passed, the only sound the faint ticking of a clock and the occasional clink of glassware. At last, he straightened, his face pale. Well, this is aconite monkshood poison. No mistake, lethal in small doses, and this residue's concentrated enough to do harm. Where'd you get this, Miss Marple? Her pulse raced, but she kept her voice steady. From a friend's tea service. She fell ill after drinking from it, though she's recovering, thank heavens. Can you confirm it matches aconite purchased recently? Mr. Harrow's eyes widened, but he nodded, sensing the weight of her question. I keep records of all restricted substances. Aconite's not something we sell lightly, it's regulated, you know. He moved to a ledger behind the counter, flipping through pages with a frown. Here's something odd. A purchase 2 weeks ago, under the name Thomas Reed, ordered a small vial of aconite extract, claiming it was for botanical research. Paid cash, no questions. Miss Marple's mind snapped to Victor. Thomas Reed, you say? Did you see the buyer? A tall fellow, polished, city type, wore a gray suit. Had a sharp way about him. Not a local, that's for sure. He paused, squinting at her. You think this is tied to your friend's illness? I'm exploring possibilities, she said, her tone mild but her thoughts racing. Victor, with his lawyer's polish and evasive charm, fit the description perfectly. The vial she'd seen him slip into his pocket at the fete. The missing monkshood from Clara's greenhouse, it all aligned. But she needed more than alignment. She needed proof that would hold in court. Could you test the residue against your stock of aconite? She asked, to be certain it's the same. Mr. Harrow nodded, already reaching for a vial labeled with a skull and crossbones. Give me an hour. I'll run a chemical assay, compare the compounds. If it's a match, you'll know for certain. Thank you, she said, her smile warm but her mind already leaping ahead. I'll return shortly. This is most helpful. As she stepped back into the village street, the sun was high, casting sharp shadows across the cobblestones. Her thoughts churned like a river after rain. The teacup's residue was a damning clue, but Victor's use of a false name, Thomas Reed, suggested a deeper cunning. Why go to such lengths? Was Clara's death the goal? Or was she a means to an end? The forged will mentioned in Elise's stolen letter nagged at her. A shadow of motive. If Victor aimed to disinherit Margaret, Clara's cousin, the poison might be a step in a larger scheme. She decided to use the hour productively. The village library, a stone's throw from the chemist, was her next stop. Its dusty shelves held records of local history, including property deeds and family lineages, details that might shed light on Clara's estate. Miss Marple, with her knack for blending into the background, settled at a table with a stack of ledgers, her glasses perched on her nose. The librarian, Miss Tuttle, a woman with a penchant for gossip, hovered nearby, researching. Miss Marple, you've been busy lately. Oh, just indulging my curiosity. Miss Marple replied, her voice light. "Clara's manor has such a rich history. I thought I'd look into its past owners." Miss Tuttle's eyes gleamed. "That old place, full of secrets, I'll bet. Clara's family's been there for generations, but there's talk of disputes over the land. Her late husband's will was a messy affair, they say." Miss Marple's fingers paused on the ledger. "Disputes? How fascinating. Anything recent?" "Well," Miss Tuttle leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Word is, Clara's nephew Victor, is it? Has been poking around the estate papers. Asked me last month for old deeds. Said it was for legal matters. Seemed awfully keen on the fine print." Miss Marple nodded, her expression neutral but her mind alight. Victor's interest in the deeds, combined with the forged will and the poison, painted a picture of greed. She thanked Miss Tuttle and buried herself in the ledgers, tracing the manor's ownership. Clara's late husband, Edward, had left the estate to her, but a codicil mentioned a secondary heir, Margaret. The distant cousin of Clara died without issue. Victor, as Clara's nephew, stood to gain little unless the will was altered. An hour later, she returned to the chemist's shop, her notes tucked safely in her handbag. Mr. Harrow greeted her with a grim nod. "It's a match," he said, holding up a printout from his assay machine. "The residue in the teacup is identical to the aconite sold to Thomas Reed. No doubt about it." Miss Marple's heart leapt, but she kept her composure. "You've been extraordinarily helpful, Mr. Harrow. Might I ask one more favor? Could you provide a written statement of your findings? It may be needed, officially." He hesitated, then nodded. "If it's to keep someone safe, I'll do it. But you're stirring up a hornet's nest, Miss Marple. Be careful." "I always am," she said, her smile serene but her eyes sharp. She left the shop with the statement in hand, a tangible thread in her web of evidence. Victor's false name, the aconite purchase, the teacup's residue. It was a chain strong enough to bind him, but she needed to anticipate his next move. A man bold enough to poison his aunt would not sit idly as the net closed. Back in her cottage, she spread her notes across the table, the chemist's statement at the center. The puzzle was clear now. Victor, under the alias Thomas Reed, had bought aconite, likely extracted from the greenhouse's monkshood to cover his tracks. The teacup proved an attempt on Clara's life, thwarted only by her quick recovery. But the why lingered. The forged will suggested inheritance, but Clara's reconciliation with Margaret, hinted at in their recent talks, might have pushed Victor to act sooner. As dusk settled over the village, Miss Marple lit a lamp and sat by her window, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. The chemist's clue was a triumph, but Victor was still at large, a fox sensing the hounds. She thought of his polished charm, his evasive eyes at the fate, the vial in his pocket. He was cunning, but cunning men made mistakes when pressed. She needed to press him discreetly, of course. The next morning, she devised a plan. Victor frequented the village pub, the Red Lion, most evenings, mingling with locals to maintain his fouet of charm. She enlisted Mrs. Price, the baker's wife and a regular at the pub's knitting circle, to keep an eye on him. "Just note who he speaks to," Miss Marple said, handing her a skein of wool as a pretext. "He's such a sociable man, isn't he?" Mrs. Price, thrilled to play spy, agreed eagerly. By evening, she reported back, Victor had met a stranger at the pub, a weary man with a city accent. Discussing a delivery in hushed tones, they'd left separately. But Mrs. Price had seen Victor hand the man a small package. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind racing. A delivery, more poison, or something else? She decided to follow this new thread. The stranger's description matched no one she knew, but the village's bus stop, a hub for travelers, might yield clues, posing as a forgetful aunt waiting for a niece. She lingered there the next day, chatting with the ticket clerk. "Such a busy stop," she remarked. "Any interesting visitors lately?" The clerk, a young man with a penchant for storytelling, grinned. "Funny you ask. Had a fellow yesterday. City type, asking for a ticket to London. Carried a small case, looked nervous. Said his name was Reed, Thomas Reed, I think." Miss Marple's heart skipped. Another Thomas Reed, or Victor's accomplice, using the same alias. She thanked the clerk and returned home, her thoughts a whirlwind. The stranger might be a courier, delivering Victor's poison or forged documents. She needed to trace him, but discreetly Victor was watching now. His late-night greenhouse visits growing bolder. That evening, she visited Clara under the guise of returning a borrowed book. The widow was pale, her hands fidgeting as they sat in the drawing room. "Victor's been so attentive," Clara said, her voice wavering. "He brought me tea this morning. Insisted on making it himself." Miss Marple's blood ran cold. "But," she smiled, "how kind. Did you drink it?" "Only a sip," Clara said, frowning. "It tasted odd. So I poured it out. I didn't want to offend him." "You did well," Miss Marple said, patting her hand. "Perhaps stick to your own brewing. For now." She left the manor with a heavier heart, knowing Victor's attempts were escalating. The teacup's poison was no fluke, he was determined. Over the next few days, Miss Marple wove her web tighter. She enlisted the postmaster, Mr. Gibbs, to flag any packages linked to Thomas Reed. He reported a parcel sent to a London address, marked urgent. Miss Marple noted the address, suspecting it tied to the stranger from the pub. She also revisited Mr. Finch, the gardener, who confirmed Victor's greenhouse visits had ceased since their confrontation. But he'd seen him lingering near the manor's back gate, watching the house. The clues were mounting, but Miss Marple needed a linchpin, something to force Victor's hand. She decided to plant a seed of doubt. At the next village fete, she approached Victor casually, her demeanor as unassuming as ever. "Such a lovely event," she said, gesturing to the stalls. "I hear you've been helping Clara with her greenhouse. So kind. Considering how dangerous some plants can be." His smile was tight, his eyes flickering. "Just keeping an eye on things, Miss Marple. Clara's not as spry as she used to be." "Of course," she said, her tone sweet but her gaze piercing. "Though I hear Monkshood's gone missing. Odd, isn't it?" With all these accidents, Victor's face paled, but he recovered quickly. "Plants die, Miss Marple, nothing sinister about it." "Oh, I'm sure," she said, turning away with a smile. The seed was planted, she'd rattled him. Now, she needed to watch his next move. That night, she sat by her fire, her knitting untouched. The chemist's statement, the teacup, the false name, the stranger at the pub, they were pieces of a puzzle nearing completion. Victor was cornered, but a cornered fox was dangerous. She felt a quiet satisfaction in the hard evidence. She gathered, but caution tempered her triumph. He'd try again, and soon. She needed to be ready. As the village clock struck midnight, Miss Marple rose, her resolve unshaken. The chemist's clue had locked Victor in her sights. But the game wasn't over. She thought of Clara's trembling hands, Margaret's unsuspecting rival, Elise's cryptic role. The web was complex, but she was its weaver, and she would see it through one glimpse at a time. Chapter 11. Elise's confession. Late autumn light filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate shadows across her parlor. The air was cool, scented with the faint sweetness of her rose garden, but her mind was far from tranquil. The chemist's confirmation of aconite in Clara's teacup, linked to Victor's purchase under the alias Thomas Reed, had tightened the noose around his neck. Yet the puzzle was incomplete. Victor's motive, tangled in the forged will and Clara's estate, remained elusive. And then there was Elise, the woman at the church bazaar, her furtive glance and stolen letter hinting at a deeper role. Miss Marple's knitting lay untouched in her lap as she pondered her next move. Elise, she decided, was the key to unraveling Victor's plan, and today she would confront her. The village of St. Mary Mead buzzed with its usual rhythm, children scampering past the bakery, the postman whistling as he sorted letters, but Miss Marple's steps were purposeful. As she made her way to the tea house where Elise often lingered, her straw hat, tilted just so, shielded her eyes from the sun, but her gaze was sharp, scanning the cobblestone street for any sign of Victor or his mysterious associates. The tea house, with its gingham curtains and clinking china, was the perfect setting for a quiet conversation, one that could shift the tide of her investigation. Inside, the air was warm, heavy with the scent of scones and Earl Grey. Elise sat alone at a corner table, her dark hair pinned neatly, her fingers fidgeting with a teaspoon. She looked up as Miss Marple approached, her expression flickering between surprise and wariness. "Miss Marple," Elise said, her voice tight but polite. "What a coincidence. Care to join me?" No coincidence, my dear, Miss Marple replied. Her smile gentle but her eyes piercing, she settled into the chair opposite, placing her handbag on the table with deliberate care. I've been hoping to have a word. You've been on my mind since the bazaar. Elise's fingers stilled, her teaspoon clattering softly against the saucer. The bazaar. I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, I think you do, Miss Marple said, her tone as soft as a summer breeze, but laced with steel. I saw you with Victor, and I saw you take something from his coat. A letter, wasn't it? Quite a bold move for a crowded event. Elise's face paled, her eyes darting to the tea-house door as if expecting Victor to appear. You're mistaken, she said, but her voice wavered, betraying her. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice low and confiding. My dear, I don't make mistakes about such things. I've seen too many secrets in my time, and yours is weighing on you. Why don't you tell me about it? It's easier than carrying it alone. The words hung between them, heavy as the steam rising from their teacups. Elise's shoulders slumped, her guarded expression crumbling. She glanced around, ensuring no one was near, then leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. You don't understand, Miss Marple. I didn't want any part of this, but I had no choice. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she kept her face serene, nodding encouragingly. No choice, that sounds like quite a burden. Tell me, Elise, what has Victor drawn you into? Elise hesitated, her fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. Then, as if a dam had broken, the words spilled out. It's about Clara, her estate, her will. Victor, he's planning to kill her, not just to inherit, but to make sure Margaret gets nothing. He's forged a new will, one that names him as the sole heir. I helped him, but not willingly. Miss Marple's pulse raced, but she maintained her calm, her knitting needles clicking softly in her mind's rhythm. Helped him how, my dear? And why? Elise's eyes brimmed with tears, her voice trembling. I owe him money, a lot of it. Years ago, I borrowed from him to save my shop when it was failing. He's held it over me ever since, demanding favors. At first, it was small things, passing messages, meeting people. But then he asked me to steal Clara's old will from her solicitor's office. I didn't want to, but he threatened to ruin me, to take everything. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of quiet sympathy, though her mind was piecing together the puzzle with precision. The stolen letter from the bazaar, the forged will mentioned in it, Victor's aconite purchase, it was all falling into place. And the letter you took at the bazaar, what was in it? Elise swallowed hard, her voice dropping lower. It was a draft of the forged will, sent to Victor by his contact in London, a crooked lawyer named Grayson. It outlined how Clara's estate would go to Victor, cutting out Margaret entirely. I took it because I thought if I had proof, I could stop him, or at least protect myself. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her handbag, but her smile remained warm. You were very brave, Elise, and very wise. Do you still have the letter? Elise nodded, reaching into her purse to produce a folded envelope, its edges worn from handling. I've kept it hidden. I didn't know who to trust, but you're different, Miss Marple. Everyone says you see things others don't. Miss Marple took the envelope, her movements slow and deliberate. I try to see what's there, my dear. Now, tell me, does Victor know you have this? Not yet, Elise said, her voice shaking, but he's suspicious. He's been watching me, asking questions. I'm afraid, Miss Marple, he's not just cunning, he's dangerous. I heard him talking about the poison, how it would look like an accident. Clara's already been sick once, hasn't she? Yes, Miss Marple said, her tone grave, but she's safe for now, thanks to quick thinking. You've done the right thing by telling me. Elise, will you help me stop him? Elise's eyes widened, a mix of fear and resolve flickering in them. Stop him? How? He's got connections, money, everything. And if he finds out I've talked, he won't. Miss Marple said firmly, her voice carrying the weight of certainty. Not if we're careful. I need you to keep playing your part. Act as if nothing's changed. But there's one thing you can do: watch Victor's movements, especially at the manor. If he tries anything, we'll be ready. Elise nodded, her jaw tightening. I'll do it. Not for me, but for Clara. She doesn't deserve this, Miss Marple patted her hand, her smile reassuring. You're stronger than you know, my dear. We'll see this through together." As they parted, Miss Marple slipped the letter into her handbag, her mind racing. The tea-house confession had been a breakthrough, but it also raised the stakes. Victor was no mere opportunist, he was a predator, weaving a web of deceit with Clara's life as the prize, the forged will, the poison. The London contact, it was a scheme of chilling precision. But Elise's betrayal had cracked its foundation. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple spread the letter on her table, its contents, confirming Elise's story. Written in a lawyer's precise hand, it outlined a new will naming Victor as Clara's sole heir, with a clause disinheriting Margaret due to estrangement. The signature, supposedly Clara's, was a skillful forgery Miss Marple had seen. Clara's handwriting in the locked diary, and this was too angular, too deliberate. The letter also mentioned a meeting in London to finalize the document, set for the following week. Time was running out. She lit a lamp as dusk fell. Her notes a patchwork of clues: the tea-house conversation, the poison receipt, the missing monk's hood, the chemist's sassy, and now Elise's confession and the stolen letter. Each was a thread, weaving tighter round Victor, but the danger was growing. He was bold, perhaps desperate, and a desperate man was unpredictable. The next morning, Miss Marple took a calculated risk. She visited the postmaster, Mr. Gibbs, under the pretense of mailing a parcel. As he sorted stamps, she steered the conversation. "To Victor, such a busy man," she said, her tone idle. "Always sending packages, I hear. Anything unusual lately?" Mr. Gibbs, ever eager to chat, leaned forward. "Funny you mention it. He sent a package to London yesterday, addressed to a Mr. Grayson, marked it urgent, odd for a lawyer. Don't you think? Usually it's letters, not parcels." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she smiled. "Very odd. Did you see what was inside?" "Not my place to peek," he said, chuckling, but it was small, heavy for its size. Looked like a book or a box. She thanked him and left, her mind buzzing. A parcel to Grayson. The crooked lawyer, perhaps the forged will, or more poison. To ensure Clara's death looked natural, she needed to act, but confronting Victor directly was too risky. Instead, she turned to Clara, visiting the manor under the guise of delivering a whereupon shawl. Clara welcomed her, though her eyes were shadowed, her hands unsteady as she poured tea. "You're too kind, Jane," she said, her voice thin. "I've not been myself lately. Victor's been so attentive, but I don't know. Something feels wrong." Miss Marple's heart ached for her, but she kept her tone light. "You're wise to trust your instincts, my dear. Have you noticed anything unusual? Visitors, perhaps, or odd packages?" Clara frowned, setting down her cup. "Now that you mention it, Victor brought a package yesterday. Said it was a gift for a friend, but he was in such a hurry to leave. I saw him in the greenhouse again, too, late at night." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The greenhouse, always the greenhouse, Victor's sanctuary for his deadly work. She stayed a while longer, steering the conversation to lighter topics. But her thoughts were on the parcel and Grayson. She left the manor with a promise to return, her resolve hardening. That evening, she enlisted Mr. Finch, the gardener, to keep watch on the greenhouse. "No need to confront him," she said, handing him a thermos of tea as a pretext. "Just note what he does and stay safe." Mr. Finch, loyal to Clara, agreed readily. "He's been slinking around too much for my liking. I'll keep my eyes open." The next day brought a new development. Mrs. Price, the baker's wife, reported seeing Victor arguing with a man near the church, a weary figure, matching the description of the pub stranger. "They were at it like cats," she said, her eyes wide. "Something about a delivery gone wrong." Victor looked furious. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind piecing together the threads. The stranger, likely Grayson's courier, had botched something, perhaps the parcel's delivery. Victor's frustration suggested his plan was fraying, and a fraying plan meant mistakes. She needed to capitalize on that. She decided to push Elise further, meeting her at the village park under the guise of a casual stroll. The air was crisp, the leaves crunching underfoot as they walked. Elise looked drawn, her eyes darting nervously. "He's onto me," she whispered. "Asked me yesterday if I'd seen his letter. I lied. But he didn't believe me." Miss Marple's voice was calm, reassuring. "You're doing wonderfully, my dear. Just a little longer." Have you noticed anything new? Meetings, packages, anything at all? Elise nodded, her voice low. He's meeting someone tomorrow night at the old mill outside the village. Said it was to settle things. I overheard him on the phone. Sounded like Grayson. Miss Marple's heart leapt, but she kept her composure. The mill, you say? That's very helpful. Will you come with me? We'll stay hidden, but I need your eyes to confirm it's Grayson. Elise hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes, but she nodded. For Clara, she said. I'll do it. The plan was set. The following evening, as the village settled into twilight, Miss Marple and Elise crept toward the old mill, a crumbling structure by the river, its wheel long still. They hid behind a cluster of willows, the shadows cloaking them. Miss Marple's heart pounded, but her resolve was steel. She'd faced danger before, in quieter ways, and she knew the power of patience. At last, Victor appeared, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. Another man joined him, weary, city-suited, carrying a briefcase. Their voices carried faintly over the river's murmur. You lost the parcel, Victor hissed, his voice taut with anger. Do you know what this cost me? It wasn't my fault, the man Grayson presumably snapped. Your courier botched the drop. I've got the will ready, but we need Clara gone before Margaret signs anything. Miss Marple's breath caught. The will, the poison, it was all confirmed. She glanced at Elise, whose face was pale but resolute. They listened as Victor outlined his next move, another dose of aconite, this time in Clara's evening cocoa, to be administered the following night. As the men parted, Miss Marple and Elise slipped away, their steps silent on the mossy path. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple felt a surge of triumph, tempered by caution. Elise's confession, the stolen letter, the overheard meeting, it was a net closing around Victor. But he was still free, and Clara was still in danger. She turned to Elise, her voice firm. You've been brave, my dear. One last task. Tell the police what you heard, but only when I give the word. We'll catch him in the act, and he'll have no escape. Elise nodded, her eyes fierce. I'm ready. Let's end this. Miss Marple smiled, her heart light despite the danger. The confession had been a turning point, a glimpse that shattered Victor's carefully laid plan. She was content, for now, knowing the truth was within reach, but wary of the final move. Victor was a fox, but foxes could be trapped, and she was the hunter now. Chapter 12. The Trap in the Greenhouse. Twilight over St. Mary Mead was thick with the scent of damp earth and fading roses, a hush settling over the village as if it sensed the drama about to unfold. Miss Marple stood by her cottage window, her silhouette framed against the soft glow of a single lamp. Her knitting lay abandoned on the table, its needles silent for once, as her mind wove a plan as intricate as any lacework. Elise's confession had been a thunderclap, revealing Victor's plot to poison Clara with aconite-laced cocoa, orchestrated through a forged will and a crooked London lawyer named Grayson. The overheard meeting at the old mill had sealed it. Victor's next move was imminent. Set for the following night in Clara's manor, Miss Marple's heart beat steadily, but her resolve was iron. Tonight, she would set a trap in the greenhouse, the heart of Victor's deadly scheme, and catch him in the act. The greenhouse, with its humid air and deadly plants, was Victor's lair, where he'd harvested the monkshood and hidden his tools of betrayal. Miss Marple knew he'd return there, either to retrieve more poison or to cover his tracks. Elise's cooperation was her ace. She'd agreed to lure Victor to the greenhouse under the pretense of a meeting, giving Miss Marple the chance to overhear his confession and alert the police. But the plan was delicate, a house of cards that could collapse with one misstep. Victor was no fool, and a cornered fox could turn vicious. She began the day with quiet precision, her movements as unassuming as ever. First, she visited Clara at the manor, her pretext a basket of homemade scones. Clara, pale and fragile, welcomed her into the drawing room, her hands trembling as she set out teacups. You're a dear, Jane, she said, her voice thin. I've been so jumpy lately. Victor's been hovering too much, perhaps. Miss Marple's smile was warm, but her eyes were sharp. He's very attentive, she said, her tone light. Does he often prepare your cocoa? I hear he's quite the cook. Clara frowned, her fingers tightening on her cup. Funny you mentioned that. He insisted on making it last night, but I didn't drink it. It smelled off like bitter almonds. I poured it into the sink when he wasn't looking. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she kept her composure. Wise of you, my dear. Perhaps stick to your own recipes for now. She steered the conversation to village gossip, planting a seed of caution without alarming Clara. As she left, she glanced at the greenhouse, its glass panes glinting in the morning sun. Tonight, it would be the stage for Victor's undoing. Her next stop was Elise, whom she met at the village park, away from prying eyes. The young woman's face was drawn, her hands twisting a scarf as they sat on a bench beneath a sprawling oak. "I'm scared, Miss Marple," she admitted, her voice low. "What if Victor suspects something? He's been watching me like a hawk since I took that letter." Miss Marple patted her hand, her voice calm but firm. "You're doing wonderfully. Elise, he suspects, but he doesn't know. Tonight, you'll send him a note, say you need to meet him in the greenhouse at 9 to discuss the will. Tell him you're worried about Grayson's reliability. That'll draw him out." Elise's eyes widened, but she nodded. "And you'll be there with the police?" "I'll be there," Miss Marple said, her smile reassuring. "The police will be close, hidden but ready. You just play your part, and we'll do the rest." Elise swallowed hard, her resolve hardening. "For Clara, I'll do it." Miss Marple's final task was coordinating with Constable Harris, a steady young officer who'd learned to trust her instincts. She met him at the police station, a small building smelling of ink and polished wood. Over tea, she laid out the plan: Elise's note, the greenhouse meeting, Victor's likely confession. "He's planning to poison Clara tonight," she said, her voice grave. "We've got evidence the teacup's aconite, the chemist's statement. Elise's testimony, but a confession would seal it." Harris nodded, his jaw tight. "Sounds risky, Miss Marple, but I trust you. We'll have men in the garden, out of sight. If he confesses, we'll move in." "Good," she said, her eyes glinting. "He's clever, but clever men trip when they think they're safe." As the day waned, Miss Marple prepared with the care of a general before battle. She dressed in a dark shawl and sturdy shoes, blending into the shadows. Her handbag held a small flashlight and a notebook, her tools for recording the truth. At 8 o'clock, she slipped into Clara's garden, guided by Mr. Finch, who'd agreed to watch from a distance. The gardener's loyalty to Clara was unwavering, his spade a quiet threat as he led her to a hiding spot behind a cluster of rhododendrons. "Near the greenhouse, Victor's been jumpy," Finch whispered, his breath visible in the cool air. "Saw him this afternoon, checking the greenhouse door." "He's up to something," Miss Marple nodded, her heart steady. "He's walking into our trap, Mr. Finch. Stay hidden and signal if you see anything odd." She settled into her hiding place, the rhododendron's leaves brushing her shoulders. The greenhouse loomed ahead, its glass walls reflecting the faint moonlight. At 8:30, Elise arrived, her steps hesitant but determined. She slipped a note under the greenhouse door, as instructed, then retreated to the manor. Her role complete for now. Minutes ticked by, the village clock chiming 9. Miss Marple's breath was shallow, her senses sharp. At last, Victor appeared, his tall frame moving swiftly through the garden. He glanced around, his face taut, then retrieved the note and read it, his lips curling into a frown. He unlocked the greenhouse door and stepped inside, leaving it ajar. Miss Marple crept closer, her movements silent, and positioned herself by an open window, hidden by a curtain of ivy inside. Victor paced, his hands fidgeting with a small vial aconite. No doubt, the greenhouse was a jungle of shadows, the air heavy with the scent of earth and danger. She held her breath, waiting for Elise. Elise entered moments later, her face pale but composed. "Victor," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "we need to talk. Grayson's getting sloppy. He nearly lost the parcel. What if someone finds the will?" Victor's eyes narrowed, his voice low and sharp. "Keep your voice down, Elise. Grayson's fine. He's got the will ready. Clara's the problem. She's tougher than I thought. The tea didn't work, but the cocoa tonight will. A stronger dose, straight from the monk's hood I took last week." Miss Marple's heart leapt, her fingers tightening on her notebook. There it was, the confession, clear as day, She scribbled the words. Her hands steady despite the thrill. Elise played her part perfectly, her voice rising with feigned panic. But what if they trace it? The chemist, the receipt you used. A false name, but someone might know. Victor laughed, a cold, brittle sound. No one knows, Elise. Not the chemist, not Clara, not that nosy old woman poking around. I've covered my tracks. Clara's cocoa is ready. She'll drink it tonight, and by morning, it'll look like a heart attack. The will's filed, and Margaret's out. Miss Marple's pulse raced, but she remained still, her eyes locked on Victor. He was unraveling, his arrogance betraying him. She glanced toward the garden, where Constable Harris and his men waited, their shapes barely visible in the shadows. She raised a hand, the signal they'd agreed on. Elise pressed further, her voice trembling but bold. And me, Victor, what happens when you don't need me anymore? You'll throw me to the wolves, won't you? Victor's face darkened, his hand closing around the vial. Don't test me, Elise. You're in too deep to back out now. Help me finish this and your debts are clear. Cross me and you'll regret it. Before Elise could respond, a rustle broke the silence. Mr. Finch, stepping into view, his spade gleaming in the moonlight. That's enough, lad, he said, his voice gruff. You're done. Victor spun, his eyes wild. You, what are you doing here? Miss Marple stepped forward, her shawl slipping to her shoulders, her voice calm but unyielding. He's helping me, Victor. As am I helping Clara. You've been very careless, my dear boy. Vials, receipts, forged wills. And now, a confession. Victor's face contorted, a mix of rage and fear. He lunged toward the door, but Constable Harris and 2 officers burst in, their torches cutting through the darkness. Victor Langston, you're under arrest, Harris said, his voice steady, for attempted murder and forgery. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Victor froze, the vial slipping from his hand and shattering on the greenhouse floor, its contents seeping into the soil. He sank to his knees, his bravado gone. You don't understand, he muttered. It was mine. Clara's estate, all of it. She didn't deserve it. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. No one deserves death, Victor. Not for money, not for pride. You chose your path, and now you'll face it. As the police cuffed Victor and led him away, Elise collapsed against a workbench, tears streaming down her face. It's over, she whispered. Thank you, Miss Marple. Miss Marple patted her shoulder, her smile gentle. You were brave, my dear. Clara's safe because of you. They left the greenhouse, the night air cool against their skin. Mr. Finch locked the door behind them, his face grim but satisfied. Knew that lad was trouble. He muttered, good riddance. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire. Her knitting resumed at last. The greenhouse trap had worked. Victor's confession, witnessed by Elise, Finch, and the police, was ironclad. The vial's shards, the chemist's statement, the stolen letterall would support the case. She felt a quiet triumph not in Victor's fall, but in the safety of Clara and Margaret. Yet she remained alert, her mind sifting for loose ends. Grayson, the London lawyer, was still at large, and the forged will needed to be secured. As the village clock chimed midnight, she set her needles aside, her thoughts drifting to the tiny glimpse in the tea-house that had started it all. A dropped receipt, a whispered plan, such small things, yet they'd shattered a murderer's scheme. She was content, for now, but ready for whatever shadows lingered, her eyes ever watchful for the next thread in life's intricate tapestry. Chapter 13. Clara's redemption. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a soft, golden glow, as if the village itself exhaled a sigh of relief. The events of the previous night, the trap in the greenhouse, Victor's confession, and his arrest had rippled through the community, whispered in hushed tones over morning tea and market stalls. Miss Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, a cup of chamomile steaming beside her. The case was nearly closed, but threads remained untied. Clara's safety, Margaret's future, and the lingering shadow of Grayson, the crooked lawyer in London, today. Miss Marple resolved to weave these final strands into a tapestry of resolution, ensuring peace for Clara and justice for all. The manor was her first destination, its ivy-clad walls bathed in sunlight as she approached. Clara, still fragile from her ordeal, welcomed her into the drawing room, her eyes brighter than they'd been in weeks. "Jane, you're a miracle," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. "The police told me everything, Victor. The poison, the will. I can't believe I trusted him." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her smile gentle but her mind sharp. "Trust is a precious thing, my dear, and easily misused. But you're safe now, and that's what matters. How are you feeling?" Clara's hands fidgeted with a lace handkerchief, relieved, but haunted. "Victor was family. I thought he cared for me, but it was all for the estate. And poor Margaret, she doesn't even know the half of it." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to Margaret, the spirited artist who'd arrived unaware of the danger. "Have you spoken to her since yesterday?" "Not yet," Clara admitted, her voice soft. "I've been afraid. We've been estranged for so long, ever since that silly argument over my husband's will. I pushed her away, and now, I don't know how to make it right." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "It's never too late to mend a bridge. Clara, Margaret's here, and she's stronger than you think. Why not invite her over? A honest talk might heal more than you expect." Clara hesitated, then nodded, a spark of resolve in her eyes. "You're right, Jane. I'll send for her today. But what about the will? Victor's forgery, how do I ensure it's destroyed?" "That's in hand," Miss Marple said, patting her hand. "I've spoken to Constable Harris. They're retrieving the forged will from Grayson's office in London. Your original will, naming Margaret as secondary heir, is safe with your solicitor. But to be certain, I'd suggest rewriting it, with witnesses, to leave no doubt." Clara's shoulders relaxed, a weight lifting. "I'll do it. Today, if possible. Will you help me, Jane? You've seen through this whole mess." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. "Let's make it ironclad." The morning unfolded with quiet purpose. Clara summoned her solicitor, Mr. Pettigrew, a bespectacled man with a penchant for precision. Miss Marple sat by as Clara dictated her new will, her voice steady as she named Margaret as her primary heir, with provisions for local charities and a small trust for Mr. Finch, the gardener who'd stood by her. Miss Marple suggested adding a clause to protect the estate from future disputes, and Pettigrew nodded approvingly, his pen scratching swiftly as they worked. Margaret arrived, her auburn hair catching the light as she stepped into the drawing room. Her eyes, wary at first, softened at Clara's tentative smile. "You sent for me?" she asked, her voice cautious but hopeful. Clara rose, her hands outstretched. "Margaret, I've been a fool. I let old grudges keep us apart, and I nearly lost everything. Can you forgive me?" Margaret hesitated, then crossed the room, embracing her cousin. "There's nothing to forgive, Clara. I've missed you." Miss Marple watched, her heart light, as the two women sat together, their voices mingling in soft laughter and tears. The solicitor, discreet as ever, finalized the will, and Miss Marple served as a witness, her signature a quiet seal on their reconciliation. By noon, the document was filed, its contents secure. Clara's estate was safe, and Victor's scheme was dust. But Miss Marple's work wasn't done. Grayson, the London lawyer, remained a loose end. She contacted Constable Harris, who reported that the police had raided Grayson's office, recovering the forged will and a cache of incriminating letters. Grayson, it seemed, had been Victor's silent partner, profiting from forged documents for wealthy clients. His arrest was imminent. A final knot in the case. That afternoon, Miss Marple took a walk through the village, her straw hat shielding her from the sun. The air was alive with gossip. Victor's arrest, Elise's pardon for her cooperation, Clara's recovery. At the tea house, she paused to chat with Mrs. Price, the baker's wife, who'd heard whispers of Victor's confession. "They say he broke down in the cell," she said, her eyes wide. "Admitted everything: poison, forgery, all of it." Miss Marple nodded, her smile serene. "Justice has a way of finding its mark, Mrs. Price. A small glimpse can unravel even the cleverest plans." Back at the manor, she joined Clara and Margaret for tea, the atmosphere lighter than it had been in weeks. Clara, her color returning, spoke of plans to restore the greenhouse, replacing its deadly plants with roses. And herbs, Margaret, sketching idly on a napkin, suggested a mural for the Manor's hall, a tribute to their family's resilience. Miss Marple listened, her heart content, but her mind still sifting for any overlooked detail. As evening fell, she returned to her cottage, the village settling into a quiet hush. The case was closed, Victor convicted, Grayson apprehended, Elise freed from her debts, and Clara and Margaret reunited. The forged will was destroyed, the original restored, and the aconite safely disposed of by the police. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the tiny glimpse that had started it all, a dropped receipt in the tea-house, a whisper of a final arrangement. Such small things, yet they'd saved lives. She sat by her fire, her knitting resumed, the needles clicking like a metronome. The Manor was safe, the village at peace, and her role, as always, was the quiet observer. Seeing what others missed, she sipped her tea, the chamomile soothing her nerves, and felt a deep satisfaction. The puzzle was complete, its pieces fitting perfectly, a testament to the power of patience and perception. As the village clock chimed midnight, Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her eyes drifting to the window. The stars were bright, the night calm, and St. Mary Mead slept soundly. Clara's redemption was more than a legal victory, it was a restoration of trust, of family, of hope. And for Miss Marple, it was enough. She was ready, as always, for whatever mystery might come next, but for now, she was content, her heart at peace in the quiet of her little world.